Chapter 783. The demon lord's eyes had been open the entire time, but the vitality within them was gradually fading, making them seem rather dim. At this moment, his eyes suddenly brightened for a moment. Perhaps it was because of a shooting star streaking across the night sky. That shooting star came from the northern star domain, possibly even from the heavenly sovereign star in the extreme north. What did this mean? There was no need to give any advance warning to kill in the starry sky. It was just a coincidence, just like how your arrival was not because of caution or courage, but because you had no other choice. With some difficulty, the demon lord turned his head to his son and said, "If you had not cleanly killed off all your brothers, making it so that no one but yourself can use the astral executioner, given your patient nature, how could you have taken such a massive risk to personally kill me?" The young demon lord sternly replied, "Even if they were still alive, how could I be at ease letting them meet with my lord? So in the end, I would still appear before my lord." This simple story is very well written, and you have also done very well. The demon lord looked into his eyes, his voice clear and cold. But you should be keenly aware of what the astral executioner signifies, so have you ever thought, if those other races really do break through the wall, how will you deal with them? Father, I've very seriously considered this question, and the final conclusion I've reached is that this is the only way. First of all, if I don't use the astral executioner, not even the military advisor or big ant can guarantee that they can kill my lord. 2 years ago, the abyss witnessed a miracle. I do not wish for another miracle to occur, especially if it happens to my lord. Secondly, I do not care if the other races can use the astral executioner to find a way to break through the wall, because that will require many years. The young demon lord continued, "Even if there were a few descenders in the past, they could only become my slaves in the end. Before that day arrives, I believe that I have already unified the continent we reside on. Before the foreign army arrives, I will lead the army over, so why should I worry about this problem?" As he spoke, his expression was very calm, brimming with boundless confidence and firm will. The demon lord gazed at this young face and thought of the scene that had flitted across his eyes when he saw Chen Chongqing's stones. He vaguely understood, and then he felt gratified. Grand plans, grand ambitions, hegemony, peerless achievements. It turned out that he did not need to personally accomplish them. He could also hand them over to his descendant. The demon lord smiled. "Since you're prepared, it's fine." The young demon lord bent down and lightly kissed his forehead. He sadly said, "I can't bear for Sir to leave. No, in fact, I should have left long ago." The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "Only tonight, when I once again witnessed your brilliance, did I realize that my greatest mistake was that my ambition had been thwarted 1,000 years ago. My body had long since decayed into dust, yet I still lusted after power, unwilling to pass the throne to you young people." With hot tears in his eyes, the young demon lord said, "Yes, we can no longer wait, so we can only think of a way to ask Sir to leave this world." It was very difficult to understand the relationship between the demon lord and his son. If there was sorrow and reluctance, then what was all this treachery and callousness? Chen Chongqing also found it incomprehensible, but he understood the very incomprehensible conversation between the demon lord father and son. On that night in the Mausoleum of Books, he had been at the Tianhai Divine Empress's side. He had seen and sensed the powerful soul of that monk from the other continent, and he had also come from that continent. From a certain perspective, he was the condition that the descendants of the deceased had offered to the great Zhou imperial court, and he could also become the vanguard of the other race. More importantly, he had sensed that light in the river of stars. He had seen that mysterious and distant unknown world and had faintly sensed a few terrifying cheese. But just as the young demon lord had said, that was assuredly a matter of many years in the future. Both he and Chen Chongqing still had enough time to make themselves stronger, to make their races stronger, to make the continent stronger, so that they could have complete confidence in meeting the challenges of the unknown. First, they needed to determine who this continent belonged to. To put it another way, they needed to determine who could continue living. I must admit that you are truly worthy of being the hope of the descendants of the deceased, the successor of Yin and Shang. You are much stronger than rumored. Tonight, if you had not attracted all of Imperial Father's attention, it would have been extremely difficult for me to find a chance to borrow that killing intent from the starry sky. The young demon lord appeared rather embarrassed as he looked at Chen Chongqing. In these circumstances, I naturally found it embarrassing to kill you. Chen Chongqing replied, I thought that you had always wanted to kill me. The young demon lord smiled. Correct. In the original plans, you should have been dead long ago, either at Lord Heidi's hand or at my little sister's hand. Even if you had endless methods to survive these two trials, you would still have been killed by Imperial Father. Chen Chongqing replied, I'm still alive. The young demon lord said, That's very good. Bringing a living pope back to Shuilao City can help me resolve many problems. The human race and demon race had confronted each other on the continent for countless years, but there had never been a situation where an important figure like the Pope had been captured, not on either side. If the young demon lord really did bring Chen Chongqing back to Shuilao City, it would assuredly become the most glorious moment in the history of the demon race, and it would assuredly stabilize his position as demon lord. Chen Chongqing only said one sentence, Do you think there's hope? The young demon lord recalled the scene he saw in the sky when he opened his eyes and arched his brows. At that moment, Chen Chongqing had fused two of the most resolute sword techniques of the human race into the blazing sword precisely to kill him. Unless his imperial father was still alive or the military advisor or the demon commander were personally present, no one could stop Chen Chongqing from calmly meeting his death. There truly is no hope, so you can just die. The young demon lord's thoughts left as quickly as they had come. He said, In any case, you definitely won't let me eat you, so quickly die. You also know that I like Su Yorong, so I've always wanted you to die. Chen Chongqing replied, I'm somewhat confused as to where your confidence comes from. Then what about you? You're already heavily injured and powerless to fight, yet you're still able to calmly converse with me. Where does your confidence come from? The demon lord smiled. You don't need to answer, because I very coincidentally know the reason. I drank too much with my friends and only updated now. My apologies. Chapter 784. The young demon lord said no more. He lowered his body and lightly touched the demon lord's forehead as he softly chanted. He was not speaking ordinary demon language. It was imbued with an innate sorrow, like a final prayer, a blessing. About to die, his father. The light in the demon lord's eyes was already gradually dimming, just like that star in the northern sky. Nank held his hand on the other side, but he paid no attention. He only calmly gazed at the young demon lord, lightly patted the back of his hand, and then slowly closed his eyes. As he closed his eyes, his breathing became even longer, until there was no gap between them, and then it stopped. The dark blue starlight spread out from the wound on his abdomen, transforming his demon body into ice. The cold winds no longer howled, the starlight retreated into the distance, the darkness thickened, and all was quiet. It was like time and space had frozen. The demon lord was dead. The legend of a generation had come to an end. The most magnificent period of history 1,000 years ago had finally come to a slightly sloppy end at this moment. To the human race, that period of history had come to an end with Han Qing's departure from the pavilion in front of the Mausoleum of Books and the collapse of the Lingyan Pavilion. To the demon race and the entire continent, tonight was the true end. After some time, the young demon lord wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, ceased his grief, and stood up. As he stood up, the darkness in the sky seemed to pour into his body, making him seem even larger and more powerful. The legacies of countless experts that had existed for tens of thousands of years were now formally and completely handed over to him. From this moment onwards, he was the sovereign of the northern continent, the master of the demon race. There was no need for any prefix, young or of the new generation. He was the demon lord. He turned to Chen Chongqing. When a mighty figure like Imperial Father leaves this world, he should not be so lonely or dull. Fortunately, with you, the Pope of the human race, accompanying him in death, this can be considered a form of consolation. Now you can die. Of course, you have to leave behind those things of yours. Chen Chongqing asked, "What are you referring to?" The demon lord was quiet for a while, then replied, "The Garden of Zhou? The heavenly tome monoliths? Tonight, I might have lost a father, but the compensation I can obtain will not be too small." Hearing this, Chen Chongqing confirmed that he truly knew the source of his confidence. Then, where did his confidence come from? "Do not attempt to enter the Garden of Zhou." The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "Although I am not an expert like Imperial Father that can sever your connection to space, I can guarantee you that when you try to pass through space, I have countless ways to make you fail." Chen Chongqing thought for a moment and asked, "Black robe?" Somewhat surprised, the demon lord said, "You were able to think of the reason so quickly. Your mind is rather clear." After the coup of the Garden of Zhou, the Li Palace and Mount Li had conducted a very long analysis. They had confirmed that Black Robe had a deep understanding of the Garden of Zhou and was even able to use some sort of method to influence the laws of the Garden of Zhou. Back then, Nank had crippled the soul pivot that could cause the monster tide, and Black Robe's metal plate had also been pierced through by the heaven-shrouding sword, but who could guarantee that she did not have other tricks up her sleeve? He had been heavily injured by the demon lord. The little black dragon had been thrown tens of thousands of li away, the green leaf was not here, the heavenly tome monoliths had not been comprehended, and he did not dare to enter the Garden of Zhou. No matter how one looked at it, it would be extremely difficult for Chen Chongqing to leave alive, but he himself did not think so. "If I want to leave now, it's very simple," Chen Chongqing said to the demon monarch. Surprised, the demon lord asked, "Is that so?" Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, "I just need to kill you." As he said this, he was very calm. The demon lord arched his brows. "You think you have the right to say such a thing?" "Why don't I have the right to say such a thing?" Chen Chongqing replied, "You're older than me, but not by much. You're skilled at enduring silently, but your true talent isn't necessarily higher than mine. You're the demon lord, I'm the Pope, and I'm no less skilled in magical treasures than you. No matter how you look at it, I'm no worse than you, so why can't I fight with you?" Strength, cultivation, talent, fortuitous encounters, good fortune, status, authority, the young demon lord was naturally second to none in all of these aspects. But on this continent, there were two people who could contend against the young demon lord in all these aspects: Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. The demon lord calmly gazed at him, then suddenly laughed. "It truly is reasonable, but you seem to have suffered very heavy injuries tonight." "Yes, but why are you saying so much to me?" Chen Chongqing replied, "This means that you don't have the confidence to kill me, and this gives me a lot of confidence, the confidence to kill you." After saying this, he extended his hand into the darkness. Several heavenly tome monoliths transformed into stone pearls noiselessly flew out of the darkness and landed on his wrist. Many of his bones had been broken, but his left arm was still intact. Previously, in the night sky, he had been prepared to use his left hand to attack. Now, his left hand was still tightly gripping his sword, very stable. Several thousand swords flew up from the lake bottom, out of the forest, and around his body. They quietly floated, also very stable. The demon lord sensed the awe-inspiring sword intent in the night sky and narrowed his eyes. "Tell me, if Suli were to use these swords, what would happen?" These words had nothing to do with the current situation and seemed particularly abrupt. Just like when the demon lord attacked. The demon lord's weapon was not that stone pestle called the astral executioner, but a goat horn comb. To be more precise, it was a powerful magical artifact very similar to the goat horn comb. It was called the Heavenly Demon Horn. The Heavenly Demon Horn brought with it countless streams of dense black qi as it descended towards Chen Chongsheng. Black pervaded the snowy valley, obscuring the starry sky. It was like a true night, but also like a bottomless abyss, instilling fear in all who saw it. This sight made Chen Chongsheng think of that night he had seen on the snowy plains after leaving the Garden of Zhou, and his expression became rather solemn. The young demon lord had patiently endured for many years, concealing all his talent and brilliance in his unruly appearance. Tonight, he had finally revealed his edge. After obtaining the complete legacy, his cultivation had reached an unimaginably powerful level. It was very difficult to find a similarly powerful figure in the younger generation of the human race. Both he and Su Yorong were clearly lacking. Even if Qiu Shanjun came, he probably would not be able to defeat the Demon Lord. Only Xiao Zhang, Liang Wangsun, and the others at the top of the proclamation of liberation might be able to put up a fight. He was currently heavily injured, and his control over his sword was not even a tenth of his peak state. He could only rely on magical treasures and external objects to fight, so he was even less of a match. But he had not lied before. He truly did want to try and kill the Demon Lord. Because he had other methods, other helpers. Chapter 785. The darkness descended, descending upon Chen Chongsheng's head. Countless sword glows lit up, moving back and forth in the darkness as if they wanted to cut everything into pieces. No one knew whether the darkness would be cut down or the sword glows would be destroyed. In truth, there was no result. Because, extremely suddenly, in this ruined garden that was filled with cold snow and frost, an astonishingly powerful explosion occurred. Boom! It was like that star in the extreme north had truly become a shooting star. It was like that shooting star had truly crashed to the ground. It had crashed here. The earth quaked uneasily. Mud and ice were thrown into the air as a dark green light flickered in and out of existence like a bolt of lightning. Two straight and clear sword slashes appeared in the darkness, one horizontal and one vertical, like a cross that was slowly fading away. This explosion and these two sword slashes had both come from Nang. She stood under several winter willows, her hands gripping those two ridiculously long Southern Cross swords as she stared at the nearby Demon Lord. A trickle of blood dripped from the corner of her lips. Her petite body was covered in the terrifying burn marks of demon qi. It was clear that she had suffered very heavy injuries. The Demon Lord's face was pale and the mangled wound on his chest had deepened, a dark green light flashing within. He had also suffered significant injuries, and he had also been poisoned by the peacock plume. No one had expected Nank to suddenly attack, and even more unexpected was that she would attack the Demon Lord. Chen Chongsheng had also not expected that she was not acting as he had imagined. The Demon Lord stared into Nank's eyes, his slightly hoarse voice unable to conceal his shock and anger. "Have you gone mad?" In these last 2 years, Nank had been fleeing with her father. From this aspect, she and the young Demon Lord were naturally irreconcilable enemies, but the demon race was a world where the strong were revered. Tonight, the previous Demon Lord had died, and before his death, he had acknowledged the current Demon Lord's position. The general situation was set. As a member of the demon race, especially a member of the Imperial clan, she had no reason to continue opposing the Demon Lord. It could not be forgotten that the Demon Lord was her elder brother and Black Robe was her teacher. The Demon Lord suppressed his emotions and said to her, "Of all the sisters, I love you the most. You should be well aware that after the chaos of Shuelao City, all the sisters are still alive. I did not even kill them, much less harm you, but why must you oppose me?" Nank's expression was still wooden, as if she was not the one who had acted, but the words she spoke were extremely like the snow of Shuelao City, cold and firm. "My sisters are still alive, but you killed all the men. In your eyes, this is benevolence and love, but in my eyes this is pity and contempt, because in your eyes we women are very weak, and we pose no threat to your throne. That's what I hate the most about you." Nank said these words to the demon lord, and also to her father on the snowy ground. She gazed at her father's crystal-like corpse and said with an extremely complex emotion, "Father, so you never thought about letting me lead the divine race." The gap between her eyes was still a little wide, and her gaze was still a little dull, but it was able to show incomparably complex emotions. This was because her voice was trembling slightly, her lips were also trembling slightly, and perhaps her demonic heart was also trembling slightly. "When I was very young, I revealed the talent of the surpassing bird bloodline. You were very happy at the time and would bring me to every banquet. Later on, Su Yorong proved that her talent was better than mine. From that point on, you no longer liked me. I always believed that it was because you were preparing to raise me into your successor and rule the divine race in the future, but you realized that I was too weak, unable to bear this responsibility, so you were disappointed." Nank gazed at the dead demon lord and continued, "I did not want to disappoint you, so I worked very hard to make myself stronger. I suffered untold hardships to become a disciple of the military advisor. I entered the garden of Zhou to kill Su Yorong. I did many things. Even after teacher and the others betrayed you, I did not abandon you. I risked the destruction of my body and soul, endured the pain of 10,000 nights devouring my body, and rescued you from the bottom of the abyss. I believed that by doing this, I could prove to you that I was strong and loyal, that you would like me once more, value me, but in the end," she raised her head to the dim star in the north and indifferently said, "in the end, you were still not willing to glance at me." Only tonight, only at this moment, did the young demon lord realize that his younger sister actually had such thoughts. Although she had the innate bloodline of the surpassing bird, although she was extremely talented, her fighting intent so strong that it was difficult to find in the snowy region, although she seemed foolish, she was actually extremely intelligent, but, in the end, you are still a woman, the demon lord harshly said. He believed that this was one of the reasons why his father had never considered letting Nank inherit the throne. "Who says that a woman can't be the demon lord?" Nank drew back her gaze and looked into the young demon lord's eyes. Her eyes were still somewhat lifeless, but they were also faintly tinged with fervor, as if something was burning deep within them. "Is Tianhai not a woman? Do you dare to say that you will do better than her in the future?" No one could answer this question. Not even the demon lord could say anything that went against his heart. Nank continued, "Since women can also be women, why did teacher choose you, and why did father choose you?" The demon lord gazed at her silhouette in silence for a very long time, and then he smiled. "Because I am stronger than you, and my divine race pays particular attention to the strong, so teacher and imperial father ultimately chose me." Nank looked into his eyes, her voice somewhat mechanical. "If I kill you, I will naturally be able to prove that I am stronger than you." The demon lord's expression remained calm. "You will die. Even if I let you win by some fluke, who can you prove it to?" Although he can no longer see it, I still want to try. The Southern Cross swords in Nank's hands tilted forward like two spears about to pierce through the darkness. The furious howling of the wind instantly swallowed up all conversation. Green rays of light represented the trajectory of wings in the darkness. The darkness suffused with a thick demon chi and the starlight slashed out by the Southern Cross swords clashed in the snowy valley. In an extremely short amount of time, the demon lord and Nank exchanged several dozen blows before separating once more. The demon lord was still standing, golden blood spreading through his abdomen, but he did not totter, seeming to be particularly powerful. Nank collapsed on the cracked earth of the lake. Propping herself up with one hand, she found it very difficult to stand. The demon lord had clearly won, but there was no pride on his face. On the contrary, it was very solemn. "So your soul has awakened a second time, no wonder you could leave the abyss." Nank said nothing. She only stared at the golden blood flowing through his body. In this exchange, she had suffered even more severe injuries. A crack had appeared on her right wing. Indistinct weeping could be heard from this crack. Chapter 786. As she gazed at the golden blood on the demon lord's body, Nank's eyes dimmed. This meant that he had already obtained the demon lord's true legacy. When she thought of those soul-tearing winds in the abyss and those flesh-devouring maggots, she was unwilling, even despairing. A pained and angry cry burst out from her lips. The cry echoed through the valley. She used the massive Southern Cross sword to support her body and stand. The sorrowful weeping from the gap in her wings suddenly stopped. The two wings once more began to flap as if they wanted to tear apart the darkness. Her eyes were no longer dim, but as indifferent as ice and snow. The speed at which her wings flapped grew faster and faster, so fast that they seemed like blurs. An indescribably powerful chi exuded from her petite body. This chi was incomparably noble, yet it disdained to command all living beings. It danced alone on the other side of the lofty mountains, exuding an indescribable coldness. This was the peacock, this was Nank, this was the surpassing bird, this was the most unique existence amongst all birds. Not even the phoenix could make her lower her head. The demon lord's expression grew graver and graver, his voice as cold as ice and as sharp as a blade. "Do you want to die?" Nank silently stared at him. The faint green in the depths of her eyes had long ago ignited into flames, giving off an aura of madness. Don't forget what the military advisor said back then. If you really did allow your soul to completely awaken a second time, you would become an idiot. The demon lord looked at her and said, "Little sister, don't be muddle-headed. Return with me to Shuelao City. You want to prove father wrong? No, why did father never think of passing the throne to you? It's because you're sick. You were born sick." He spoke these words very harshly, but they were also very derisive, brimming with contempt and pity. Nank was most unwilling to accept this sort of attitude, but she was forced to accept the fact that the demon lord spoke the truth. When she was very young, the soul of the peacock had awakened in her body, announcing to all of Shuelao City that she possessed the noblest and most powerful bloodline. No one could have imagined that this also meant that she began to fall ill from that day. Her comprehension ability was too strong, so the soul of the peacock had awakened too early, far surpassing the speed at which her body matured. The peacock's soul continued to grow between her eyes. The distance between her eyes grew wider, and she looked more and more wooden. If the peacock's soul was allowed to continue to grow and complete the second awakening process, and she still had not grown up, then she would really become an idiot, and there was a high chance that her body would explode and she would die. The demon lord's words had exposed all truths, given all explanations, and also severed all her hopes. Nank stood at the bottom of the lake. Her dress was covered in mud and her hair was slightly messy. She looked like a little girl who had just returned from cutting pigweed. She was very pitiful. Even if she completed the second awakening of her soul that she had started in the abyss, so what? Even if she could defeat him now, so what? She would die or become an idiot. In the end, she could not become her father's successor, could not become the master of the demon race. In this world, no one could cure her illness. Her omnipotent father couldn't do it, and her omniscient teacher couldn't do it. The Southern Cross swords in Nank's hands gradually lowered, just like her head and her emotions. At this moment, a voice rang out behind her. "I can cure it." It was a very clear voice. Even though the owner of the voice had experienced a long battle, was heavily injured, and was rather exhausted, his voice still gave off a calm and serene feeling. Perhaps it was because of the content of his words, or perhaps it was because he had always been so easily trusted. Whether they were his friend or foe, or neither. This was Chun Chongsheng's voice. Back in the garden of Zhou, by the plains of the unsetting sun, the first words he said to Nank upon seeing her were, "You're sick." And then he said to Nank, "I can cure it." After so many years, he still said the same words. Nank looked at him and seemed to see that youth standing in the grass. Her somewhat dim eyes once more brightened. At the same time, she once more raised the Southern Cross swords in her hand. It was said that change was the main theme of the world, but in reality, there were also many things that were very difficult to change. At the time, Chen Chongqing's condition was for her to let him and Su Yorong go. Now, his condition was equally clear. Nank was the demon princess. She had attacked the young demon lord out of disappointment and anger at her father and teacher, but this did not mean that she was willing to betray the demon race and ally with Chen Chongqing, the pope of the human race. It certainly did not mean that she had any good impressions of Chen Chongqing and wanted to help him. Chen Chongqing's words had given her a possibility. He could cure her, so it was very reasonable for her to help him. But Nank's thoughts were even more extreme than Chen Chongqing's. She looked at Chen Chongqing and pointed her sword at the demon lord. "Let's work together and kill him." It was very straightforward, very cold, and somewhat foolish. This was Nank. "My injuries are too severe," Chen Chongqing said. "There's not much hope." As if to prove his words were true, the countless swords floating in the night sky began to buzz slightly. This meant that his spiritual sense was on the verge of being unable to perfectly control these swords. Nank slightly raised her brows. Just when she was prepared to say something, her expression suddenly changed as she gazed into the distance beyond the mountains. In the distance was the north. To the north of the mountains, 1,000 li away, a demon shrouded in a black robe appeared on a hill. The starlight shone down, bathing the snowy plains in an abnormally pure white. Logically speaking, he should have been extremely eye-catching. But not even the great Zhou army's red falcons with the best eyesight would have been able to discover his existence. He was like a very unremarkable black rock in the snowy plains. Because he was the demon military advisor, Black Robe, who was the most skilled in concealment on the continent. Black Robe's gaze rested on a shabby metal plate in front of him. The starlight fell on the metal plate, just like it had in the past, as if nothing had changed. But in reality, the starlight tonight was different from the starlight of the past 1,000 years. The brightest star in the northern sky had already become abnormally dim, and it was hard to say when it would regain its light. A gloomy sigh drifted out from Black Robe, its emotions extremely complex. As someone who had assisted the Demon Lord for almost 1,000 years, how could he truly remain unmoved in the face of the Demon Lord's passing? If he really was unmoved, why were his jade-like fingers resting on the metal plate trembling? When Black Robe's fingers rested on the metal plate, Nank and Chen Chongqing both sensed an immense danger. Nank felt it because of the connection between master and disciple, while Chen Chongqing relied on the fated star of the orthodoxy. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Chongqing yelled, "Kuei Bei Shen and Si Ba have proof." Nank flapped her wings and swiftly flew into the night sky. Chapter 787. Apology. I only discovered yesterday afternoon that there was no update the day before yesterday. To be more precise, the scheduled update I set for the day before yesterday became a scheduled update yesterday. I really don't know what happened. It must be known that because it is very rare for me to have a chapter in stock, I took a very long time to confirm when I posted it, but in short, there was no update the day before yesterday, nor was there any mention of it. Some readers must have waited for a very long time. For this, I am truly sorry. For this, I will donate a pig to the Xintian Scholarship Fund, because I am a pig. In addition, I feel that this public service project is pretty good. What Chen Chongqing shouted was the constellation, the direction. To be more precise, it was the direction of the Yesher Step. The Yesher Step was the supreme innate skill of the Yesher clan of the demon race. The demon imperial clan could learn it, but in the past few decades, only Nank had managed to perfectly grasp it. Chen Chongqing had relied on his understanding of the Taoist canon and his indescribably dry calculations, as well as his perception of the star charts on the heavenly tome monoliths to learn this set of footwork. After shouting out these directions, Chen Chongqing's right sleeve shook, and the swords flew through the air, blocking the heavenly demon horn that had borrowed the darkness to sneak in. His feet stepped on the position of the stars, and his body suddenly faded, leaving the ground. He took several steps in the night sky, heading towards the distant sky. Countless swords followed him, gradually returning to their sheaths along the way. This scene seemed extremely beautiful, but it did not have much meaning. In a little while, when his true essence ran out, he would fall from the sky and face great danger. Not to mention that the dense darkness brought about by the heavenly demon horn was closely following him from behind. Chen Chongqing had done this because he knew that Nank would definitely understand his meaning. As expected, when he appeared in the night sky filled with cold winds, almost as high as the snowy mountain range, Nank was already there. In the night sky behind her, there were 2 traces of green light fragment. It was very beautiful. But this was still not enough to leave, because the darkness brought about by the heavenly demon horn was gradually about to cover the entire snowy mountain range. And because in the distant north, Black Robe's fingers on the metal plate began to beat, just like beating a drum. The howling cold wind brushed against Chen Chongqing's face. He sensed something, and the hand that gripped his sword tightened. Nank's eyelashes trembled, but her eyes remained indifferent. She looked into the darkening night and felt the ripples of qi inside. She seemed to understand something. Although Chen Chongqing was heavily injured, and even if he worked together with Nank, they would not necessarily be able to defeat the young demon lord, but logically speaking, escaping was no longer a difficult task. But who would have thought that in this darkness, there were hundreds of yuan qi locks? The method that the demons had used to surround and kill Su Li was being used tonight by Black Robe against the 2 of them. Those probably had nothing to do with the heavenly demon horn. The young demon lord had used some other method to spread them, and then Black Robe was responsible for surrounding and killing them. How could he break these yuan qi locks? Was the Pope of the human race really going to be buried with the demon lord? Can you really cure it? Nank's voice seemed particularly somber in the cold night wind. Chen Chongqing saw a hint of determination in her eyes. He understood what she wanted to do, but he couldn't respond. If he was given enough time, he was confident that he could cure Nank's illness, especially if he could obtain Su Yorong's help. But the current situation was far too dangerous. Everyone knew that Black Robe was most skilled in mental attack. If Nank completed the second awakening of her soul, there was a high chance that she would be heavily injured by her teacher from 1,000 li away. The result would be disastrous. Chen Chongqing was not confident. Although she did not hear his answer, Nank's qi continued to rise. Perhaps she had only asked this question to comfort herself. The indifference in her eyes had completely transformed into a fanaticism with a tendency to self-destruct. And then, it began to burn. A bright peacock appeared in the night sky, radiating a green light in every direction. Its 2 wings were around 100 zhang wide. With a flap of them, the clouds scattered and the stars scattered, the snowy peaks below incessantly collapsing. The several hundred yuan qi locks hidden in the darkness were forced out by the appearance of the peacock's true body. The part of the night sky closest to the territory of the human race had the fewest essence qi locks, and was rather sparse in number. The peacock flew in that direction, smashing through countless essence qi locks, snapping its green feathers and wildly flowing qi. That side was the southeast. As he gazed at the flickering dots of light on the metal plate, Black Robe once more gave a gloomy sigh. It was obvious that his sigh this time originated from his only female disciple. Suddenly, a certain place on the southeast corner of the metal plate became extremely bright, the light even illuminating Black Robe's face. It was a face that could be described as perfect, but because it had not seen the sun for many years, it was somewhat pale and also faintly green, suffused with the qi of death. Black Robe raised his head to look at the night sky in the south. He seemed to have discovered something, and the corners of his lips turned downwards. A downwards corner of the lips usually meant that he was unhappy, or that he was not in a good mood. But on his face there was something else, like a strong sense of ridicule. The metal plate made a crisp clanging sound. The essence chi locks in the distant night sky silently scattered, killing countless startled birds. At the very front of the green light, one could clearly see that the peacock had vanished. Two black figures fell to the ground far away. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. At almost the same time, the darkness obscured the starlight. Through some unknown method, the young demon lord appeared on the snowy plains 1,000 li away. He did not speak to Black Robe, nor did he look at the place where Nank and Chern Chongqing had fallen. Instead, he looked at the mountain range, seeming very interested, even somewhat excited. Black Robe also quietly gazed at the mountain range. The wind lifted up a corner of his black cloth, revealing half of his face. One could see that his thoughts were rather complicated. He seemed to be looking at his homeland. Perhaps it was because there were old friends there. When the young demon lord thrust the stone pestle into his father's abdomen, when that mysterious pillar of light pierced through the river of stars and landed on the mountain range, many places on the continent sensed it. The Li Palace and the Dew Platform, Holy Maiden Peak and White Emperor City, and even the distant Great Western Continent and the Dragon Islands of the Southern Sea all knew that something major had happened. And when the heavenly sovereign star in the northern region of the stars suddenly dimmed, all the star observation platforms noticed this strange phenomenon. Based on the results of calculations, the great Zhou army stationed on the front line of Mount Han received a military order to investigate. Gaoyang village, which should have reacted the fastest, was thrown into chaos by one upheaval after another. No one thought of crossing the mountain range to find out what was going on. Byonghong appeared on the mountain range. 2 years had passed. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he had been heavily injured and on the verge of death, but he was still alive. Moreover, his injuries had been completely healed, and his strength had taken another step forward. He was now faintly on the verge of taking first place amongst the storms of the 8 directions. Even he, who had traveled several thousand li in a single night, could not help but feel rather weary for the little red flower tied to his pinky. When the demon lord entered Mount Han to kill Chen Chongqing, the Elder of Heavenly Secrets had warned the world. Byonghong had not needed much time to travel from Jiangnan to Mount Han. Even White Emperor City's Jin Yulu was far inferior to him in traveling such a long distance. Yet tonight, he was not the first person to arrive. The first person to arrive was a scholar. Byonghong had studied in the famous 10,000 Years Pavilion of Xiling for many years, so he had a scholarly air, but he did not dare to call himself a scholar in front of this person. The demon lord often dressed as a scholar as he traversed the world, but even he found it embarrassing to call himself a scholar in front of this person. This person had truly read far too many books. He had read in his hometown, in Luoyang, in the capital, in the Li Palace, in the Imperial Palace, in the Mausoleum of Books, in the snowy plains, in his dreams, by blowing the horn, in his drunken stupor by the lamp. Before Go Hanshi, Chen Chongqing, and Yu Ren, only he had read all 3,000 Taoist canons. Later on, he even began to teaching for several decades at Star Caesar Academy. He taught countless famous generals until the demon lord's hair turned white. He was the most famous scholar of the last 1,000 years, Wang Jitze. Chapter 788. Byonghong had never met Wang Jitze. But many years ago, he had once stayed in the Lingyan Pavilion for a night, borrowing the light of the white sun flames to carefully examine that portrait for a very long time. Perhaps it was because Wang Jitze was Wang Jitze, but when he saw the scholar, he immediately recognized him. 3 years ago, he had met Wang Jitze in Mount Han. For various reasons, he had not told too many people, but in truth, many people knew that Wang Jitze was still alive. He was just traveling the 4 seas, making it difficult to find him. Of course, those people were all important figures like Byonghong. Although they were important figures of the present world, Seeing Wang Jitsa with their own eyes still made them feel shock and glory, and Byung Hong was no exception. His voice trembled as he asked, "Lord Wang?" Wang Jitsa said nothing. Byung Hong calmed his mind and walked to the nearby lakeshore. Pointing at the traces of battle, he described his analysis and the scene. Wang Jitsa still said nothing. He calmly gazed at a certain place in the cedar forest, his thoughts inscrutable. Byung Hong thought of those rumors and couldn't help but ask, "My lord, the demons are making a ruckus in the south. Are you still not prepared to act?" There was a slightly bulging hill in the cedar forest, its surface covered in snow and cold. The demon lord had died there and was still inside. Wang Jitsa knew, but he was not prepared to tell anyone, nor was he prepared to do anything to the remains of his old friend. Just like that person beneath the Orthodox Academy, burying his body into the mountain. What was meant to be gone would eventually be gone. No matter how much one struggled, no matter how one built a mausoleum that reached the heavens, it would become an unremarkable mound in the human world. The demon lord had finally died. His Majesty and his big brother had died many years ago. Wang Jitsa thought of many things of the past, of many old friends, and felt deeply moved. He shook his head and prepared to leave. Byung Hong gazed at his somewhat desolate back and advised, "His Majesty Taizong treated Milord coldly, but the people of the world respected and loved Milord. How could Milord bear to abandon them?" Of the storms of the 8 directions, Wang Jitsa had always admired Byung Hong the most, but he felt that this person's eye for companions was truly terrible. Now that he heard Byung Hong's advice, he smiled and thought that he should advise Byung Hong to divorce his wife and not marry. Unexpectedly, when he spoke, he sighed. In this aspect, what right did he have to advise others? In the snowy plains thousands of miles away, the starry river in the night sky gradually revealed its true appearance. Black Robe quietly gazed at the snowy mountains, as if he was seeing an old friend. The wind and snow were like yesterday, cold and austere. He lifted his veil hat, revealing a corner of his face. His skin was suffused with a faint green color of death, but it couldn't conceal his peerless beauty, causing others to be unable to help but guess what kind of peerless elegance he possessed in the past. The demon lord was also looking in the direction of the mountains, a wildfire faintly burning in his deep and serene eyes. He seemed particularly interested, even excited. Is this person really Wang Jitsa? It's a pity that I didn't get to see this legendary person. The demon lord hoarsely said, if only he had chased over. We would have definitely taken a good look at him and then torn him to pieces. Without a doubt, Wang Jitsa was the most frightening enemy the demons had ever encountered. There were many records of him in the history books of Xuelao City. On the rankings of the demon race's most hated targets, he was even higher than Emperor Taizong. From 1,000 years ago until now, several hundred years had passed since they had last heard news of Wang Jitsa. The demon race still hoped that Wang Jitsa was still alive, because they did not want him to die of old age. Only by living could they see the defeat of the human race, could they tear him to pieces. From this perspective, the demon lord's words were only right and proper, but the problem was that if Wang Jitsa really did chase over, just what confidence did he and Black Robe have in defeating Wang Jitsa, keeping Wang Jitsa here, and even tearing him to pieces? With a heavy sound, the snowy plains began to tremble. A mountain-toppling fiend, several dozen zhang tall, slowly walked out of the starlight as if it had always been in the void. Within the mountain-toppling fiend's massive coiled horns, a thin and small figure sat cross-legged. Sunflowers weaved from golden threads covered his entire body, as well as green gems that were incomparably beautiful but gave off a feeling of decay. However, this was still unable to steal away the cold light in his eyes. He was the strongest expert of the demon army, the demon commander. As it turned out, he had been hiding in the snowy plains this entire time. Tensome mountainous black figures followed behind him, all of them demon generals. The array the demons had deployed tonight was truly enough to encircle and kill any expert in the world, even a legendary expert. Back outside Xuelao City, in the face of such an array, if not for Chen Chongqing delivering his sword from 10,000 li away, Su Li would have almost been ground to death. Even though he had managed to escape in the end, he had still suffered extremely heavy injuries. A sigh brimming with regret seeped out of the demon commander's armor. The tensome demon generals also had a similar mood. The starlight shone on Black Robe's lower jaw, causing the faint green aura of death to slightly disperse, leaving behind only a beautiful paleness. Although this person is still alive, he's already dead, Black Robe said to the snowy mountains. His voice was devoid of any emotion, but all the demons present could hear the intense ridicule in it, as well as a sliver of extremely deep hatred. The demon commander's rust-covered armor was covered in a broken breastplate, the edges of which were inlaid with the purest crystals. He extended his hairy hand and took out a cloth-wrapped object from the breastplate. It was very obvious that he was filled with loathing for that object of breeze. Unwilling to hold it in his hand for even a moment longer, he threw it to the ground. The bundle landed on the snowy plains with a muffled thud. Then, a pitiful and sharp curse that made one's teeth ache rang out. As expected of the ancestral hall of the southern cult, its resources are not shallow. The longevity sect was killed twice by Su Li, but it was still able to conceal such a sinister and powerful move. The demon commander's voice was very shrill and unpleasant to hear. But the Taoist technique is somewhat lacking. I asked the symbol master of the Council of Elders to make a few modifications, so it should be much more useful. Despite being thrown from several dozen zhang to the cold snowy plains, that object did not seem injured. It constantly struggled, looking rather like a small beast. The demon lord's gaze fell on that object, revealing an expression of loathing. Upon hearing the words symbol master of the Council of Elders, he felt a little more apprehensive. In his eyes, this object was born a monster, and now that it had been modified, it exuded a bloody and bizarre odor. Go back to the south and do your business. If Chen Chongqing is still alive, remember to kill him a few more times. A hemp rope suffused with golden light landed on the demon lord's palm, and the cloth bag on the snowy ground was untied. A black shadow leapt out from the inside, and in the blink of an eye, it was already several hundred feet away. In the light of the starlight, one could faintly make out that this was a thin and small human, but his body was covered in extremely thick fur, somewhat like a demi-human before they could completely transform. And when he stared at a certain spot, his dull eyes would occasionally flash with madness, like a wild beast that had suffered endless torment. I checked. This is the second time in Heaven Choosing Records that I've used an old friend in the wind and snow as the title of a chapter. I'm such a genius at naming chapters, and now I'm about to reach the end of my talent? Speaking of which, doesn't everyone think that I've named many chapters well? Please praise me in addition, the pig has already been donated. Chapter 789. The monster stared at these demons and bared its sharp teeth. It let out a low whimper as if it was warning and intimidating them. But in the end, he just faked biting the air twice. He confirmed that these demons were far stronger than him, and he had no chance at all. Following two screams filled with pain and hatred, the monster dove into the deep snow, heading south. It was obvious that this monster from the longevity sect was much weaker than the demon experts present, but for some reason, both the demon lord and the demon commander were on guard despite their loathing. Only when they were sure that the monster had truly gone far away did they truly relax. How is Hai Di? The demon lord raised his head to look above the mountain-toppling fiend. If his father were still in power, he would never ask such a question, because the only existences that the demon lord needed to look up to were the heroic spirits of the dead. Perhaps the young demon lord had not realized this, or perhaps the demon commander had intended for him to realize this, but the demon commander remained on the mountain-toppling fiend's head, not descending. Dead. Very good. A sinister smile appeared on the demon lord's face. Big Brother saw him on his first night in Shuelao City. Do you think we don't know? Black Robe indifferently said, Lord Haidi is still hoping to deceive His Majesty's eyes. Back then, outside Shuelao City, he took a blow from Su Li's sword and only lost an arm. Now he's even stronger, but Father is heavily injured. Even if the Heavenly Tome monoliths have recognized him as their master, how could he be sent flying into the snowy mountain in a single blow? Was he trying to take advantage of the chaos to leave, or was he trying to put on a good show? I have no interest in continuing this act. With these words brimming with derision, the demon lord took Black Robe's hand and supported him north, appearing especially respectful. The demon commander sat in the coiled corner of the mountain-toppling Fiend's Mountain. As she gazed at the back of the lord and minister on the snowy plains, she let out an extremely soft and indecipherable laugh. His laugh was hard like a broken gong. His laughter came to a screeching halt. He gazed at the distant Black Robe and asked, Where is Princess Nank? He should be dead. Black Robe's voice was still emotionless. Unlike when he spoke of Wang Jitsa, there was no derision or hatred hidden behind it. His only successor had died just like that, but he did not show any emotion. Perhaps it was because he was emotionless. Where is Chen Chongqing? He should still be alive. This time, it was the young demon lord who answered. Hearing this answer, the demon general was somewhat surprised. Tonight, the demons had laid down a perfect trap. For this, they had not hesitated to use several wars as a foundation and background. His Majesty, who had escaped from the abyss and made all the nobles of Shuelao City feel uneasy, was naturally their first target to kill, but they would definitely not let the Pope of the human race go. Now that His Majesty was dead, Princess Nank should also be dead, but Chen Chongqing was still alive. Why? The young demon lord recalled the powerful qi emitted by Nank's second awakening and narrowed his eyes. There was an accident. He believed that when the little monster returned to the south, it would bring some other surprises to this world. He thought silently. Black Robe knew what he was thinking and said, That little monster might not be able to kill Chen Chongqing. The demon commander harshly shouted, Is it that you can't kill it, or do you not want it to kill Chen Chongqing? Chen Chongqing's talent in cultivation is extremely high, his cultivation in the sword extremely profound, and his techniques endless. Although that little monster is extremely evil, it truly is very difficult to kill him. The demon lord had said these words because he did not want the demon commander and Black Robe to quarrel, but Chen Chongqing's performance in the battle had truly left too deep an impression on him. At the same time, it also left him very confused. Chen Chongqing was not like a pope, but more like an assassin walking in the darkness. Black Robe ignored the demon commander's question and said, Although Chen Chongqing is a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy, his successor is not Yi nor Shang, but Su Li. Given the demon lord's status, he naturally knew that Su Li had once been an assassin. After hearing this, he seemed to understand and said no more. Su Li had already left this world, but his mind was still there. These words did not mean that he was already dead. There was a pile of chrysanthemums in front of Mount Li's training hall, as well as the 4 words, His voice and appearance are still there. These words meant that he had taken the Holy Maiden of the South to a distant continent, but his sword was still useful in this world. The sword he had left behind was in those letters. The last letter had been opened by Chen Chongqing in front of the demon lord. At the same time, his sword was gripped in Chen Chongqing's hand. Of course, his sword had always been gripped in the hands of the Mount Li disciples, never letting go. 2 years ago, the demon army abruptly launched an attack on the south. In a very short amount of time, they had conquered tens of thousands of li of fertile land and killed their way to the base of Mount Han. Only now did the people of Mount Han remember that humiliating history from 1,000 years ago, remember the calamity of extermination that the human race had once faced. Besides the great Zhou army, all the sects and schools of the world had taken part in this grand and magnificent war. The teachers and students of the 6 Ivies streamed to the front lines. From South Stream Temple to Marshall Tree Manor, from the Qiushan clan to the Scorching Sun sect, countless cultivators of the South had come to the frigid North and begun to fight. After the confluence of the North and South, the sects and noble clans of the South were no longer as obedient as they had been in the past. More cultivators were participating in the battle, more array masters were assisting in the implementation of strategy, and with more perfect coordination, the fighting strength of the human army had clearly increased. The reason that the human race was able to maintain a stalemate with the demons on the plains and even occasionally launch a powerful counterattack, besides the morale of the mysterious cinnabar pill, was because of these changes. The Mountly Sword sect was still the same as it had been in the past. The 3 elders of the Sword Hall led Go Hanshi, Guan Feibai, Liang Banhu, and the other second-generation disciples, as well as an even greater number of third-generation disciples to Snowhold Pass, Blue Pass, and other strategic locations to assist the human army in battle. However, they rarely obeyed the orders of the army headquarters, acting on their own for the majority of the time. This sort of conduct naturally drew much criticism, but the Longevity sect currently had no way of influencing Mount Lee's decisions. Holy Maiden Peak had been very low-key in the last 2 years, and given the close relationship between South Stream Temple and Mount Lee, it naturally would not criticize Mount Lee. As for the imperial court, ever since Su Li, the disciples of Mount Lee had only ever had eyes for the sword. There was no such thing. No matter how much discussion there was, no one dared to criticize the Mount Lee sword sect. Besides these reasons, the primary reason was that they had nothing to say. Snowhold Pass and Blue Pass, guarded by the Mount Lee sword sect, were both places where the demons exerted the greatest pressure. The disciples of the Mount Lee sword sect fought bitterly on the battlefield, unwilling to fall behind. In a little more than a year, 10 some third-generation disciples had died in battle, Go Hanshi and Liang Banhu had both been heavily injured, and an upper-level star condensation elder of the Sword Hall had held back a wolf cavalry squadron for 2 whole hours in order to cover the retreat of the black armored cavalry of the Black Mountain Army headquarters. In the end, he had heroically died in battle. Who could say anything against this Mount Lee sword sect? Other than the hot-blooded Star Caesar Academy, no other sect or school had sacrificed more than the Mount Lee sword sect. In stark contrast, the Orthodox Academy stood in stark contrast. Chapter 790. For reasons that everyone knew, the students of the Orthodox Academy were heavily protected by the Imperial Court and the Li Palace. The clearest example was that the Orthodox Academy had already been recruiting students for 3 years, and the total number of teachers and students had already surpassed 300. However, there were only a few students on the front lines, and they were all clerical jobs. But no one criticized the Orthodox Academy, because everyone could see the malice hidden in the Imperial Court's arrangements, and they could also understand why the Li Palace was so nervous. More importantly, besides those clerical students, the Orthodox Academy still had people on the front lines. Although that person might have even forgotten his identity, Su Moyu, who was overseeing the Orthodox Academy in the capital, would not forget. The priests in the Li Palace responsible for related matters, especially the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, would not forget that he was a person of the Orthodox Academy, and a very important one at that. Wofujishio was the strongest expert of the Wolf tribe's younger generation. He also had the identity of vice superintendent of the Orthodox Academy. After Zhou Tong's death, Zhishio left the capital and went to the front lines to fight the demons, returning to the life he was most familiar with. It was unknown if his days in the capital at the Orthodox Academy had left any memories in his life, but it was clear that he did not have the self-awareness of a vice superintendent of the Orthodox Academy. In the past year, he had never once met with the students sent to the front lines by the Orthodox Academy, much less instructed them in anything. But he also did not accept the army's appointment to become the commanding general of the front walls of Blue Pass, nor did he refuse the vice principal of Star Caesar Academy, which had been privately conveyed through the deceived divine General Shui He, to the Black Mountain Army headquarters to train the most elite black armored light cavalry. Instead, he returned to his old profession in the army. Scouts, spies, concealers, assassins. Many names actually had the same meaning. Zheshio still lived and fought according to his own style. His life had always been composed of countless battles. As for his method, it was naturally to fight alone. Just like in the past, everyone felt that his method of fighting was too primitive, barbaric, bloody, and low-level. It would be very difficult for him to last too long on the snowy plains, and the news of his death could be heard at any moment. Yet he just had to live, and moreover, he was constantly reaping the fruits of battle. In these 2 years, his military achievements on the front lines alone were equivalent to all the military achievements of some ordinary sects or schools. The soldiers of the Black Mountain Army headquarters and Blue Pass once more recalled that saying that had been passed down for many years. Zheshio was a man born for the sake of military achievement. And now, his military achievements were the military achievements of the Orthodox Academy. In these circumstances, who could still criticize the Orthodox Academy? Of the Tensum Army headquarters in the north, there was probably only one person who could compare with Zheshio in military achievement. Interestingly, Zheshio was a famous person while Zheshio was a nobody. That person had once been a civil servant of the North Expedition Army headquarters. Because of some matters, he had been demoted to 7 Mile Shi Stronghold, becoming an ordinary roaming cavalry officer. Because he was skilled in military strategy, outstanding strength, or perhaps because his luck was too astonishing, during his time at 7 Mile Shi, he and a superior surnamed Chun had led this group of roaming cavalry to create countless miracles, obtaining countless victories, accumulating an unimaginable amount of military merit. However, whether it was because he was arrogant because of his talent, or because he used his power to bully others, or because his temper was too foul, or perhaps it was because he came from the south and not from Zhou, this officer had an extremely terrible relationship with the people in the camp. He would often contradict his superiors and violate military discipline, and the military achievements that he had painstakingly accumulated were often used to pay for his punishments. As a result, he had never been able to smoothly enter the records, so he had never been able to obtain the resounding reputation that Zheshio had. Logically speaking, with this person's ability and the speed at which he accumulated military achievements, as long as he was just a little more sensible, he would definitely become the focus of the Northern Expedition Army headquarters. It was even highly likely that he would become the youngest divine general of the great Zhou army in a few years. However, the important figures of the army headquarters had never given him this chance. Later on, people finally understood what this disregard meant. The deliberate suppression of this young officer had given rise to a great deal of discontent and injustice in the 7 Lishi camp. After a major battle 3 months ago, this feeling finally exploded. The busiest half of 7 Lishi Street had been smashed into ruins by drunken cavalry. What happened next was very simple. That officer had been expelled from the cavalry by a military order from the capital, and even from the Northern Expedition Army headquarters. He had been sent to an extremely desolate place. This place was called Sloping Cliff, located in the southern foothills of Mount Han. This was not a stronghold directly facing the demons, nor was it a necessary route for the transportation of armaments. It was just a remote horse farm that people rarely thought of. Other than the frost-colored grass that covered the cliffs, there were no other products to be found here. It was an extremely desolate place, and even the migratory birds returning from the south would not stop for even a moment. The reason why a horse farm had been set up here was because the frost-colored grass was the favorite food of the dragon stallions when they were in heat. Dragon horses were the most important mounts of the great Zhou army, so setting up a horse farm specifically to suit their tastes could be considered preferential treatment. However, to those people who had been exiled to this horse farm, it was completely insignificant. That young officer was yet another frustrated person who had been exiled to Sloping Cliff over the past several hundred years. The officers and soldiers of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm knew of his background and achievements, so they naturally felt a great deal of sympathy. However, no one had carefully thought about why an outstanding young officer like him would be suppressed by his superiors, and why this pressure had even come directly from the capital's military headquarters. No one had carefully thought about it. Although this place was desolate and remote, far from the battlefield, making it impossible to obtain military merits, it also meant that there was no need to worry about being killed by demon experts on the battlefield. In short, behind all these seemingly illogical things were assuredly some reason, though no one knew of it at the time. The officer was the person involved, so he naturally knew the reason, but he did not say anything. But perhaps because of this matter, in the 2 months he had been at Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, his mood had been rather gloomy. Every day, the smell of alcohol could be smelled on his body. He might not be able to drown his sorrows in alcohol, but fortunately, he did not neglect his proper business. The biggest impact on him was that he slept soundly. Every night, he slept until dawn. Until one night there were 2 extremely dull thuds coming from the back of the tent. He propped himself up and angrily yelled out the window, "Are you going to let me sleep or not?" No one answered his question, so he fell back into a deep sleep. However, it wasn't long before he was woken up again. Accompanied by his subordinates, he went to the side of the horse farm near the cliff. When he saw the sight before him, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The cliff was littered with the traces of stones tumbling down and dust rising. A man was lying on the ground, his status unknown. A girl of 12 or 13 was hugging her knees to the side, her clothes in tatters, her body covered in mud and her expression dazed. "I've already been away for 2 days. I've been working hard this entire time, but I really don't know if I'll have time to write tomorrow. If I don't, I'll remember to tell everyone." Chapter 791. The young officer walked up to the man whose life or death was unknown. The man's face was covered in blood, but it was still possible to see that he was very young. The young officer smelled a very faint but indescribable odor, and couldn't help but frown. He squatted down at the man's side and began to examine his injuries. He discovered that the man's body was covered in wounds, especially his right arm, which had been broken into 10-odd pieces. Seeing such heavy injuries, his frown deepened. Looking up, he saw 2 clear marks on the cliff covered in crushed stone and frosted grass. It was very easy to determine that these 2 people had fallen from a high place. The young officer knew that higher up on the cliff was a long-ago road for transporting soldiers that led to the flourishing towns on the eastern side of Mount Han. It had been abandoned for many years, but it was still passable. Occasionally, some bandits and smugglers would take the risk. Could this person have fallen from there? To fall from such a high place, it was no wonder that he had suffered such heavy injuries. That he had not died on the spot could already be considered rather fortunate. Receiving the clean water and tools handed over by his subordinate, the young officer began to clean the wounds of the unconscious young man and treat his injuries, ensuring that the situation was temporarily stabilized and that there would be no problems. After finishing these things, he stood up, cleaned his hands, and walked over to the little girl. He squatted down once more and said to the girl, "Hello?" The girl said nothing. Hugging her knees, her lifeless gaze rested on the young man. Her face was pale and she seemed extremely weak. The young officer extended his hand in front of her eyes and snapped his fingers. He continued to ask, "Who are you people?" The girl moved back a few steps, appearing somewhat afraid. The young officer saw the hint of shock flash through her eyes, and couldn't help but think of those pitiful eyes in the unicorn's cave many years ago. "We've asked many questions, but this girl has never responded." It seems that if she's not mute, then she's deaf. A subordinate pondered the question and then added, "Of course, she might have been scared silly." "If you know that she might have been scared silly, then why do you keep asking?" the young officer grumpily said as he got up and walked back to the camp. At this moment, a somewhat weak but very clear voice came from behind him. "Hungry?" The young officer turned around. The girl stared at him in a daze. "I want to eat meat." Hearing this, the young officer stared blankly for a moment, then began to laugh. His fingers once more snapped in the chilly mountain wind. "It's good that you know how to talk and know how to make requests." Autumn in the north was not much different from winter. Sloping Cliff Horse Farm was deep in the mountains, so the weather was relatively warm. However, after a night of northern winds, it still became cold. Fortunately, the Kong beds in the camp had been heated up beforehand, so no soldiers suffered frostbite. On the contrary, quite a few of them suffered burns. "They're all so stupid. No wonder they were driven here to raise horses." The young officer reprimanded his subordinates, drove them out, and looked at the corner of the room. At the end of the Kong bed, it was very cold, especially at the base of the northern wall. The green bricks were not much different from ice cubes. But the little girl refused to leave, either because the injured young man was lying on the Kong, or because that place was closest to the coal stove, and the pot on the stove was continuously stewing meat, the meat gurgling in the soup. She held a bowl and chopsticks in her hand, staring at the meat stewing on the stove. Her eyes were focused, so she looked even more lifeless. "You know how to be afraid of heat. Looks like you're not really stupid." The young officer looked at her and shook his head. He walked over to the Kong and sat down. With the passage of time, the little girl slightly relaxed her vigilance, but the young man was still unconscious. He began to flip through the man's belongings, hoping to find some clues, but ultimately came up empty. The young man had no money, no travel permits, no household registration, not even a piece of paper. He was dressed in the most ordinary of clothes, and he had no ornaments that could provide any information. He only had a string of stone beads tied to his wrist. These stone beads seemed rather simple and crude, with nothing special about them. Thinking of the scent he had smelled at the bottom of the cliff, the young officer lowered his body and began to earnestly sniff at the young man's neck and body. Although he could not be sure if it was the scent he had smelled earlier, he was now sure that the young man's body smelled of many medicines. He could smell the unique scents of at least 17 different medicines. So he was a medicine merchant. No wonder he would take the risk to travel through the night. He looked at the young man and sighed. People die for wealth, but it's a good thing. The fires of war had already been raging for 2 years. Even though the provinces and the South were working together to provide support, many resources were still in short supply, especially medicinal ingredients. It was no secret that the front-line armies lacked medicine. For many medicine merchants who had not obtained the imperial court's permission, as long as they could deliver medicinal ingredients to the front lines, they could sell them and earn enormous profits. As for the dangers they might encounter along the way and the strict laws of the imperial court, they simply did not consider them. A personal guard brought in hot water and said to him, "My lord, let us handle the rest." The young officer was prepared to agree, but when he saw the little girl by the wall, he shook his head. The little girl held a bowl and chopsticks, her lifeless eyes filled with indifference, or perhaps numbness. Only when she looked at the meat stewing in the pot would her eyes grow a little warmer. She looked like a little beast that had suffered countless cruel tortures, evoking sympathy. "Let me do it. Since I'm saving people, I have to save them." When the young officer made this decision, he had no idea that this imbecilic little girl, who could easily remind him of past events, was the little princess of the demon race, and he had no idea that the unconscious young man was related to him. He only felt that the little girl looked very pitiful. At the same time, he felt that although the young man was unconscious and had his eyes closed, for some reason, he gave off a very tranquil and refreshing feeling. In short, he was rather pleasing to the eye. Just like this, the young man and woman who had fallen from the mountain remained at Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, receiving the attentive care of the soldiers. The young officer had spent the most energy on this, because cooking meat and treating illness had always been important matters of the state. After several days, the young man finally woke up. He did not immediately open his eyes. Instead, he used 5 breaths of time to calm his mind, and then meditative introspection to confirm the state of his injuries. Only after confirming the severity of his injuries did he open his eyes. The first thing that caught his eye was the young officer. He thought to himself, although this person has a full beard, he doesn't seem like a fiendish person. For some reason, he seems rather pleasing to the eye. It was only after a very long time that Zhishyo, Tang 36, Go Hanshi, and Guan Feibai learned of the situation. Both the people of the Orthodox Academy and the Mount Li Sword sect fell silent for a very long time, thinking, "Are all of you blind? In Osaka, although it's tiring, it's really quite good. If there's a chance, I should travel more. It's really good, as long as I don't fall silly like Qin Chongqing and Nank. I've been on the road the entire time, and will only be able to return home on the 6th. The updates for the next few days might be a little messy, but I will do my best. I wish you happiness every day." Chapter 792. Before he opened his eyes, before he calmed his mind for 5 breaths, Chen Chongqing's vision was filled with the night sky and those densely packed essence chi locks. The last scene in his memory was him and Nank falling to the ground, the black and white of the snowy mountain range getting closer and closer. And then there was the dull thud of impact, the endless pain, and the boundless darkness that came with it. When he awoke from the darkness, he had no idea how much time had passed, only that he was still alive. As he calmed his mind for 5 breaths, he performed meditative introspection and discovered that his meridians were shattered in many places. If a normal cultivator discovered that they had suffered such heavy injuries, they would assuredly panic, perhaps even despair. But he had much experience in this aspect, so he maintained his composure. He even accurately determined that the most serious injury had come from the demon lord's counterattack. He opened his eyes and saw a face covered in a beard. The beard on this face was so lush that it looked like a shrub that had not been pruned for several decades. If one did not look carefully, it would be very difficult to find where this person's eyes were. But as long as one saw this person's eyes, they would find it hard to look away. This was because these eyes were very clear, their divine splendor restrained but deeply concealed their passion. They were like the morning sun behind the clouds in the morning. Although they were not willing to easily reveal their true appearance, everyone knew that they were assuredly a very moving sight. The eyes were the windows to the soul and could see many things. Chen Chongqing had seen many eyes, like his martial uncle the Pope's eyes that were as vast as the sea of stars, or Su Yorong's eyes after a fresh rain fell over an empty mountain, but he had to admit that this person's eyes were extremely good, much better than this bearded face. "You're awake?" the person asked. Chen Chongqing noticed this person's clothes and realized that he was an officer of the Great Zhou, which made him feel even more at ease. The young officer guessed that he could not speak for the time being, so he took the initiative to say, "This is Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. I am the manager here called—" He paused, then continued, "Luobu." Chen Chongqing thought to himself, for some reason, this name sounds rather strange. "First answer a few questions of mine. Blinking once is yes, blinking twice is no." The officer called Luobu looked into his eyes and asked, "You are a person of Zhou?" Chen Chongqing blinked without hesitation. Luobu asked, "A medicine merchant?" Chen Chongqing hesitated, then blinked twice. Luobu smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. He seemed especially radiant, and at the same time, his true age was revealed. For such a young man to grow a full beard, no one knew why. Chen Chongqing couldn't help but think about this question. It doesn't matter if you don't dare to admit it. You can't be a spy anyway. Rest well. Although I don't know if you can recover, you shouldn't die. Also, that little girl, I don't know if she's always like that, or if there's something wrong with her. Don't worry." After saying this, Luobu walked out of the house. Nank held a bowl full of meat in her hands and walked from the corner of the room to the bedside. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Chen Chongqing's face. Her sluggish eyes were filled with confusion, as if she had never seen him before. Suddenly, she seemed to have remembered something and placed the bowl of meat in front of Chen Chongqing's face, indicating for him to eat. Chen Chongqing didn't know what had happened and shook his head with difficulty. "Only by eating meat will you have strength," Nank said as she stared into his eyes. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, what kind of things would require strength? Nank seemed to understand the meaning in his eyes. She placed the bowl by the pillow, pointed at her forehead, and very seriously said 2 words. "Cure illness." Seeing this, Chen Chongqing finally understood. At the end of the night battle in the snowy mountains, in order to break through the demon lord and Black Robe's arrangements, she had forcefully awakened her soul a second time. In the end, she had still failed to break through that barrier, and her sea of consciousness had suffered severe damage. To explain it in the most ordinary terms, she was now truly stupid. She no longer remembered anything, including who Chen Chongqing was, but she still remembered that Chen Chongqing had promised to cure her illness. Chen Chongqing looked into her eyes in silence for a very long time. Of course, he had never been able to speak in the first place. He could speak to himself and others in his heart. "Since I promised you, I will definitely cure you, even though I don't have much confidence." The current Nank did not know what illness she had, only that she remembered this matter. But she once more understood his eyes and felt very happy. She gave a simple and honest laugh, extremely innocent and adorable. In the garden of Zhou and the snowy mountains, Chen Chongqing did not remember ever seeing Nank smile. In his and the common people's understanding, she had always been cold-blooded, heartless, cruel, and murderous. How could he connect her to this sweet and smiling girl in front of him? Only now did Chen Chongqing notice that she was wearing a cotton jacket and her hair was combed into 2 buns. It was very casual, and he didn't know whose handiwork it was. He suddenly remembered that this was the great Zhou army. If someone discovered her true identity, it would probably cause a massive problem. She was a member of the Imperial clan. Her demon horns were hidden, but where had her 2 wings gone? A piece of stewed meat was brought to his lips, interrupting his thoughts. There was not much salt in the meat, so it was rather bland, but it was extremely glutinous. Crucially, the one feeding him this meat was the little princess of the demon race. Naturally, Chen Chongqing recalled the little princess of the dragon race, Zhizhi and Suli, who had married this little princess of the demon race. Where was the little black dragon? As the Pope's appointed protector, she had already established some sort of connection with Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing could think of a way to call her over. But he would not do this. A year and a half ago, he had been injured by Heidi on the battlefield. It was only by relying on the little black dragon that he had been able to escape. Who could have expected that on his way back to the mountains, he would be pursued by several experts of the imperial court? Afterwards, he did not have the Li Palace investigate this matter, but he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Even someone of Su Li's abilities and daring had to endure silently after returning from the snowy plains, let alone him? After experiencing these things, he finally understood how naive he had been when he had shouted in the spring sunshine of Xuanyang City that Su Li was here. Now that he did not have the strength to protect himself, he would never have contacted Gigi, much less had her come over and expose his whereabouts. The current him was no longer as naive as he had been in the past. Nank began to feed him meat soup. It was neither cold nor hot, the temperature just right. The stone pearl was still on his wrist, but everything else had already been sent into the garden of Zhou. His abdomen was slightly warm, and logically speaking, he should have been able to calmly rest, but he always felt that something was wrong, or perhaps he had forgotten something. Had that officer called Luobu really not sensed anything? How had he been able to so easily believe in him and Nank? This horse farm called Sloping Cliff was clearly very desolate, but for someone so young to become the chief official, how could he be so naive? The curtain in front of the door was raised, letting in a cold wind. Luobu also walked in, a bowl of pitch-black medicinal soup in his hand. Chapter 793. Luobu wanted to trade medicinal soup for the meat soup in Nank's hands, but Nank did not want to. She looked at Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing blinked his eyes with some difficulty, and then with even more difficulty, he turned his head to Luobu, using his eyes to express his gratitude. The medicinal soup was brought to his lips. He noticed that the bowl had been washed very cleanly, with no leftover odor, much less any oily odor. Then, he smelled the scent of 17 medicinal ingredients in the bowl. These ingredients were far from precious in the capital, but in a remote horse farm like this, they would have been very difficult to prepare. Of course, what shocked him the most was not the cleanliness of the bowl or the completeness of the ingredients, but the medical skill that Luobu had displayed through this bowl of medicinal soup. Time slowly passed as the medicinal soup and meat soup swapped places. Chen Chongqing and Nank had already spent their 4th day at Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. Nank was still in a daze, not knowing who Chen Chongqing was or who she was. She only vaguely remembered that Chen Chongqing was very important to her and that she would stand guard at his side every day, cooling the medicine, cooking the meat, and cleaning him like a maid. Moreover, she would warily stare at anyone who tried to approach the room, with the exception of one person, Luobu. In the first 3 days of being unable to speak, Chen Chongqing would often think, perhaps it was because Luobu had given her a lot of meat to eat? On the 4th day, he was still unable to get off the bed, but his body could already move slightly, like turning around and raising his hand. Most importantly, he could speak. To his surprise, the officer called Luobu did not ask about his origins again. Although it was a remote horse farm, there were still many matters to attend to. As the commanding officer, Luobu naturally could not always laze around in the room. Many times, the people who came to deliver the medicinal soup were his personal soldiers or other officers of the horse farm. Because of his bloodline, and because he had cultivated the art of following one's will since childhood, Chen Chongqing had an innate quality that made others feel close to him. Whether it was the black goat in the imperial palace or the black dragon under New North Bridge, they were all like this, let alone these officers with relatively simple minds. In a very short amount of time, he had become familiar with these people. As long as he ignored Nank's gaze, which was like that of a little beast protecting its food, Chen Chongqing's conversation with the officers proceeded very smoothly. He gained a clearer understanding of the situation on the front lines, a more direct understanding of the morale of the army. More importantly, he understood the story of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm and Luobu. Anyone who heard of Luobu's story would inevitably feel a great deal of sympathy and anger towards the injustice. Chen Chongqing was no exception. He believed that the reason Luobu had been able to obtain so many military merits over the years wasn't because of luck or background, but because of his talent. From Sloping Cliff Horse Farm's seemingly unhurried but actually extremely orderly daily management and life, one could see this person's skill in managing his subordinates and his path of command. And the fact that he was able to quickly recover from Chen Chongqing's injuries with just a few medicinal soups was even more proof of this person's extraordinary medical skills. Of course, these were all impressions he got from their conversations, and naturally couldn't compare to seeing it with his own eyes. If he wanted to see it with his own eyes, he had to be able to get out of bed and walk around the stud farm. It was just that he hadn't thought about why he was so interested in the officer named Rob. On the 7th day, Chen Chongqing woke up. When Zhixiu had suffered countless torments in Zhou prison and his meridians had been severed, he had ultimately relied on the stimulation of pain to heal his injuries in the shortest amount of time possible. He had used the same method, and he had spent the entire night fighting against unimaginable pain. Nank had been attending to him the entire time, using a towel to wipe his sweat, feeding him water, and gently caressing his chest. Her movements were naturally very inexperienced and clumsy, but they were very serious. She had consumed a great deal of her mind, and only when she saw that he was finally quiet at the fourth watch did she relax and go to sleep, not noticing that he had left the room. The morning light shone on the meadows between the mountains, a thin mist flowed down from the valley, and the horses that had just woken up began to moan. Chen Chongqing picked up a branch and, supporting his weak body, began to casually walk around the horse farm. It wasn't that he didn't cherish his body. On the contrary, he needed to move around so that his newly reconnected meridians could be consolidated as quickly as possible. Sloping Cliff Horse Farm covered a very large area. The barracks, arrow stacks, and array pivots seemed to be scattered in every corner, but if one carefully observed, one could see some sort of rule hidden within them that could ensure the most effective response when encountering an enemy. Chen Chongqing was well versed in the Taoist canon, but he had never studied military law. He could see through the intricacies of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm's military arrangements at a glance because, while Su Li had taught him swordplay on the journey back from the snowy plains to the south, he had also taught him a great deal of this aspect. From the freshness of the earth in front of the palisades and the wooden strongholds, one could see that these arrangements had probably been made after Luobu arrived at Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. The more Chen Chongqing looked, the more he felt that these military arrangements contained a military strategy, perfectly confirming the knowledge Su Li had taught him. He couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for this person, but he did not associate this with certain matters. The mountains of the north were majestic and callous, and the weather was temperamental. The chilly morning light suddenly transformed into a bone-chilling gale. Countless grains of sand were swept up by the gale and rushed toward the horse farm from the entrance to the mountain range. In an instant the world turned dark. The barracks resounded with warning whistles, stern orders, and hurried footsteps. Chen Chongqing did not want to add to the chaos, so he used a branch to slowly move back along the eaves. When he raised his head, he saw Luobu. Luobu realized that he could walk and happily smiled, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. "Congratulations!" He was in a rush to arrange for his subordinates to deal with the sandstorm, so he had no time to say anything else. He glanced at the branch under Chen Chongqing's arm and shook his head. He pointed at the door behind him, indicating that Chen Chongqing should go in and take shelter. With Chen Chongqing's current speed, by the time he returned to his original room, the sandstorm would assuredly have enveloped this place. He had no reason to refuse, so he complied and walked in. Before he could turn around, the door closed, and then a clear clap came from outside. Luobu had probably slapped some sort of mechanism on the door or wall. A thick and solid bar sealed the door shut, and at the same time, several sturdy wooden boards fell down, tightly blocking the window. At the same time, an oil lamp on the table lit up without a flame. Chen Chongqing didn't misunderstand, so he didn't panic. He carefully examined the mechanism within the room and found that the structure was very simple yet very intricate. Even the most common citizen could operate it. Thinking about it, the entire Stud Farms barracks had a similar arrangement, so he completely relaxed. In the next moment, his gaze was attracted by an item on the table. The faint yellow light fell on the table, illuminating the papers. These were the extremely valuable paper from Shi Province. Let alone this remote horse farm, even the Mount Song Army headquarters did not have much. Some of the papers had ink characters written on them, while others had pictures. Chen Chongqing was not skilled in poetry, painting, or calligraphy, but he was well read in the Taoist canon, so he had a good eye. The characters were extremely well written. The strength of character was hidden under the plump exterior, disdaining to be seen by others. The paintings were also extremely good. One was a freehand painting of spring and autumn, while the other was a meticulous painting of flowers and birds reflecting the world. Whose room was this? Whose characters and paintings were these? In such a remote horse farm, how could someone so extravagantly use the paper from Sher province, write such fine characters and paint such fine paintings? Chen Chongqing faintly had an answer in his heart. Then, he saw the inscription on the two paintings. Chapter 794. The two paintings were signed with the same 5 words. A great general of sloping cliff. Upon seeing these 5 words, Chen Chongqing's first reaction was that it was very bold, but after a moment, he felt very lonely. I am a great general, how proud I am! Alas, I am a great general of the remote sloping cliff horse farm. And a great general at that. Bold and lonely, these two feelings that were very difficult to combine, appeared together and vividly on the paper. Chen Chongqing looked behind the desk and saw that the shelves on the wall were covered with books. There were profound interpretations of the Taoist school and also ordinary novels. The common characteristic was that they were all very clean. In a place that was perennially sand-swept, it was extremely difficult to accomplish this, but he could understand why. He had often used this method to clean out the books in the library of the Orthodox Academy. He had already guessed that this was Luobu's room, and when he thought about how this person actually carried a rare spatial artifact with him, he became even more curious. At this moment, he suddenly smelled a fragrance. Looking around, he saw that there was a bowl of leftover yogurt on the bookshelf. The yogurt was white and tender, adorned with a cherry and sprinkled with a few sesame seeds. Just looking at it made one's mouth water. He couldn't help but pick up the bowl of yogurt and examine it. He confirmed that it was not food from the camp, but a snack that Luobu had made last night. At this point, Chen Chongqing was truly convinced, even feeling a little ashamed of his inferiority. From Xining village to the capital, he had seen countless young talents and cultivating geniuses. Senior Yu Ren, Go Hanshi Zhixiu, Su Yu Rong, and even himself were such people, but he had never seen such an all-rounder, a genius in all fields. Yes, in Chen Chongqing's view, this young officer called Luobu could be described as almost perfect. Fortunately, although this person's medical skills were good, they were still inferior to his, he consoled himself. The whistling outside the window and the pounding of the sandstone gradually grew softer. From the distance came the shrill sound of a bamboo flute, followed by the sound of footsteps. From outside the wall came the sounds of pulling, and the wooden springs behind the door and window sprang open, allowing Luobu to walk in. Sunlight once more shone into the room, scattered by the remnants of the sandstorm, painting the entire scene with an ancient flavor. It was a very beautiful sight. Everything had happened so quickly that Chen Chongqing had not even had time to put the yogurt bowl back on the shelf. Anyone who saw this scene would think that he was about to secretly eat the yogurt. Luobu probably thought the same. The atmosphere in the house was a little awkward. There was a momentary silence. Luobu turned and walked out of the house, saying, "I'm going to look at the grass." The reason the great Zhou imperial court had set up a horse farm in such a remote mountain-like sloping cliff was precisely because the meadows here were covered in frost grass, the favorite food of dragon stallions. As the official in charge, it was only natural for Luobu to take a look at the grass after the sandstorm, but Chen Chongqing, who had been holding the bowl of yogurt, was well aware that this was just an excuse. Just like how he had hurriedly said that he also wanted to take a look at the grass and then followed Luobu out of the room, he had only found an excuse to place the bowl of yogurt down as naturally as possible. The sandstorm had stopped, but the traces of devastation were still very clear. The barracks and stables were not damaged at all, but the two interlocking crossbow huts in the distance needed to be repaired. What was more troublesome was that the frosty grass that covered the mountains and plains was covered in a thick layer of dust. Other than their slightly bad tempers, dragon stallions were basically perfect war mounts, but no cavalry would overlook the importance they attached to the cleanliness of their feed. The frost grass in the mountains was definitely not edible without being washed, and given the number of soldiers at Sloping Cliff, it was simply impossible to manually clean it. Both man and horse could only wait for the rain to fall from the sky. Perhaps for this reason, the several hundred dragon stallions on the meadow by the stream were rather irritable. From time to time, they would whimper and kick at the rocks in the meadow, the soldiers cursing as they cleaned the grass. With the appearance of a figure, the dragon stallions instantly grew much quieter, and the soldiers became even more frightened out of fear. This figure was Luobu. Luobu did not lecture them. He waved his hand, indicating that they should continue with their work. They knew that their general was not in a bad mood today, so they relaxed once more. At this moment, a soldier who had once delivered medicine saw Chen Chongqing at Luobu's side and shouted in shock. Sloping Cliff Horse Farm saving two brother and sister pharmacists who had fallen off the mountain was the most refreshing event in the last few years to these soldiers, who had never even seen a demon. Many people knew of this matter, and had even secretly gone to that room to see Chen Chongqing. Those soldiers who had chatted with Chen Chongqing were already familiar with him, so they all walked over to congratulate him. "Little cripple, you can finally get out of bed? Little cripple, you can finally get off the ground? Little cripple, you can finally come out to bask in the sun?" The soldiers of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm had always called Chen Chongqing Little Cripple, because he was very young, had a naturally tender face, and was heavily injured in bed. There was no malice in this form of address. Chen Chongqing had lived with his senior brother Yu Ren since he was a child, so he did not feel too conflicted. He just felt that his meridians were only temporarily severed and not truly crippled. This form of address was wrong, so he could not accept it. As a result, he would always earnestly correct the other party. But the more earnestly he refused, the more the soldiers of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm liked to call him this, as if they were purposely teasing him. But to the soldier's helplessness, no anger could be seen on his face as he lay on the bed. He was always calm and composed. Just like right now. "I'm not a cripple." Chen Chongqing looked at the soldiers and explained, "All of you can also see that I can get off the bed and walk around." Someone teased, "Aren't you still limping? Why don't you take another 2 steps?" Chen Chongqing was very obedient, using a tree branch to support his body as he took 2 steps. He had only just gotten out of bed at night, but he had already been walking all this time. To his still weak body, this was no small burden. Now, after taking 2 steps, he became somewhat unsteady, scaring the soldiers into hurrying forward to support him. A personal soldier on the side shouted, "Don't try to be brave. In addition, what does it matter if you can take 2 more steps? This is the front line, a horse farm. Only when you can mount a horse will you truly be fine." He had good intentions, but to the soldiers it sounded like mockery, and they all began to laugh. The dragon horses raised by Sloping Cliff Horse Farm were the primary mounts of the black-armored cavalry. On the battlefield, they were extremely brave and fierce, had very bad tempers, and were extremely sensitive to strangers. Even the most elite of cavalry would need to spend 100 days with a dragon horse in order to establish a stable relationship with it. Chen Chongqing needed someone to support him to stand, so how could he ride on the back of a dragon horse? Luobu had said nothing this entire time, but now, the corner of his lips hidden in his beard perked up and his eyes became somewhat apathetic. Only those closest to him knew that this was a sign that he was not in a very good mood. He was dissatisfied with the joke his subordinates were playing on Chen Chongqing. To his surprise, Chen Chongqing was not angry, and his face was still covered in a smile. Although this smile was faint, it was not fake. It was very real. Several hundred dragon horses galloped from the edge of the stream into the depths of the pasture. In the gradually brightening light of dawn, they arrived near the crowd. One of the horses suddenly stopped and turned its head to look at the crowd, somewhat confused as to what had happened. Finally, its gaze fell on Chen Chongqing as if wondering, "Why is this young man smiling so happily? After half a year, I have finally returned to the Qin kingdom. I am happy but also deeply moved. I don't know where to put all these emotions into words. I just hope that all of us are well. I wish you all the best. Chapter 795. The surface of the frost grass was covered in an extremely thin layer of white wool, which was precisely the favorite place of dragon horses to eat. After the sandstorm, the meadow was covered in a layer of gray, but it was truly gray. The horses had no place to eat, so they stood by the stream for a very long time. Even when they had completely seen the scenery, they could only helplessly turn around and return. Neither man nor horse would be happy to have delicious food in front of them but unable to eat it. If they saw someone laughing so happily at this moment, they would assuredly believe that the other party was laughing at them. Whether or not a person would think this, it was very obvious that the horse looking at Chen Chongqing was thinking this. It suddenly charged at Chen Chongqing. As the most outstanding warhorse, no matter how ill-tempered the dragon horse was, it would never casually attack soldiers. The soldiers were well aware that this dragon horse just wanted to give Chen Chongqing a fright. In a normal situation, this sort of play would never have attracted their attention, but when they thought about how Chen Chongqing was still heavily injured and had only just been able to move, they still warily gripped their stick. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. The dragon horse did not continue to gallop forward. At a distance of 10 some zhang, it began to slow down, its head constantly swaying to and fro as if extremely perplexed. Its nostrils were constantly opening and closing as if it was smelling something, and its naughty and nasty eyes were quickly replaced by a desire to get close. It strolled up to Chen Chongqing and respectfully lowered its head, apparently wanting Chen Chongqing to pet it. The other dragon horses noticed the activity and ran over. Just like the first dragon horse, they surrounded Chen Chongqing, carefully and uncontrollably rubbing against him with joy. One of the bolder dragon horses even stealthily licked the hand he used to hold the tree branch in. At this sight, the laughter of the soldiers of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm had long since ceased. They were all stunned as they thought, just what is going on here? At this moment, the most spirited dragon horse in the lead squeezed through the crowd and arrived in front of Chen Chongqing. It humbly bent its forelegs and kneeled on the ground. It seemed to be inviting Chen Chongqing to mount it, or perhaps it wanted Chen Chongqing to give it his blessing. Shocked gasps rose and fell from the crowd. Luobu, who was standing on the outside, restrained his smile and quietly looked at Chen Chongqing, who was surrounded by the horses, as if deep in thought. That night, the stars were as usual, and a pot of meat soup was still simmering on the stove in the room, but it was not as noisy as it had been a few days ago. Not a single soldier of Sloping Cliff Horse Farm remained in the room to chat with Chen Chongqing, because there were guests tonight. Luobu glanced at Nank, who was squatting by the stove and staring at the pot of meat, then turned his head to look at Chen Chongqing on the bed. Without any concealment, he directly said, "Of course you're not an ordinary person." Chen Chongqing thought of the almost perfect military arrangement in the meadow and the study room and said, "Of course you are not an ordinary person." Luobu looked into his eyes and asked, "Did I have anything to do with you falling down the mountain?" "No." Chen Chongqing calmly looked back at his eyes and said, "From a certain perspective, I am indeed a pharmacist." Luobu calmly asked, "Then in your stroll through Sloping Cliff Horse Farm today, did you see anything you wanted to see?" Chen Chongqing answered honestly, "Yes." "What did you see?" "I saw a great general at Sloping Cliff." Hearing this, Luobu was silent for a while, then said, "Just say what you mean." Chen Chongqing looked into his eyes and said, "I want to invite you to leave the mountain." "Leave what mountain?" "The 10,000 li of Mount Han." Beyond Mount Han was the snowy plains, the true battlefield in the struggle with the demons. Chen Chongqing added, "I'm not sure if you know or not, but Ning Shiwei is already dead, and the Mount Song Army headquarters needs a new divine general." Luobu fell quiet, then asked, can I understand that you admire me so much that you've decided to push me to the position of Divine General of the Mount Song Army Headquarters? Chen Chongqing said nothing, tacitly agreeing, because this truly was what he thought. At the same time, he noticed that although Luobu had been demoted to the desolate sloping cliff horse farm, he seemed to be able to grasp information about the higher-ups of the Mount Song Army Headquarters. This made Chen Chongqing even more curious about this person's background. If even a pharmacist can decide the position of a divine general, I can roughly understand why the great Zhou dynasty has fallen further and further. Luobu smiled at him and said, "Then are you a person of the Prince of Xiang or of the Tianhai clan? Or perhaps you're a secret emissary from the Taoist monastery in Luoyang?" The secret emissaries of the Taoist monastery in Luoyang mentioned at the end were the blue-clothed Taoists at the venerable Taoist Shang Xingzhou's side. After 2 years, hearing someone mention his master once more, Chen Chongqing felt a little emotional. He did not explain his background to Luobu, nor did he explain why he did what he did. Because he did not represent the Prince of Xiang, did not represent the Tianhai clan, did not represent any faction of the great Zhou imperial court. He represented the Li Palace, the orthodoxy, the world. He was the Pope, shouldering the responsibility of the entire world, so it was only right that he consider the future of the human race. In his view, for a person like Luobu to be placed in a place like Sloping Cliff Horse Farm was truly a colossal waste. I can roughly guess what you're thinking. It's nothing more than wasting talent or not meeting with opportunity, those old phrases. Luobu calmly said, "But you don't know I came to Sloping Cliff Horse Farm to live in seclusion, or perhaps I was forced to live in seclusion, but in the end I accepted this on my own." Chen Chongqing looked at him and very seriously said, "If you were forced by external forces, perhaps I could help you resolve a few problems." For some reason, the more serious Chen Chongqing's expression became, the more relaxed Luobu became. Perhaps it was because this made him think of those serious schoolmates of his, and then he thought of that year when sword chi filled the mountain. He subconsciously looked at his chest and thought to himself, "In the end, there are some things that I have to resolve myself." He shook his head. "I don't like trouble. I also don't want to make trouble for you. So I won't leave the mountain." Luobu calmly and concisely ended this conversation, saying, "In 2 days, when your injuries are better, I will have someone send you off." Chen Chongqing thought this over, then said, "Very well, in the future, if you need anything, come find me." Luobu smiled. "I don't like finding people, it's still troublesome." It was a plain sentence, but it was filled with confidence, just like the signature on the 2 paintings. Chen Chongqing replied, "The grace of saving my life must be repaid." Luobu replied, "Do as you please, there's no need to say it." Chen Chongqing said, "A friend of mine once taught me that there are some things that have to be done, but words have to be said even more." Luobu felt that these words were rather meaningful. He said, "That friend of yours is either a hypocrite or a true scoundrel." Chen Chongqing thought of that friend he had not seen for 2 years, and then thought of how he had not received a letter for half a year. His longing suddenly grew, and he found it difficult to suppress it. He very seriously explained to Luobu, "That friend of mine is a hypocrite, a true gentleman." Luobu smiled at these words, then turned to Nank and asked, "Is she really your sister?" This question contained a deeper meaning. Chen Chongqing had heard it clearly, but he could not give up on Nank, so he nodded. Sometimes, a liar is not necessarily an arrogant person, but rather a true person. Luobu smiled at him. "I don't know who you are, or who you represent, evil or good, but at least in this aspect, I admire you very much." The room grew quiet. There was only the gurgling of the meat soup, which was boiling. Nank filled a bowl with meat soup and walked to the side of the bed. At this moment, hurried footsteps came from outside the room. The door was forcefully pushed open, and a bodyguard rushed into the room, shouting something in shock. He was completely unaware that he was about to collide with Nank. Chapter 796. The bodyguard charged straight at Nank. Just when it seemed like his head was about to bleed and the broth splattered, this scene did not occur. Nank continued to steadily hold the bowl of broth as she stood at her original position, but the bodyguard had already passed through her previous position. This was very strange. The bodyguard had no idea what had happened and rubbed his head in a daze. Luobu's pupils constricted, because he had clearly seen what had happened just now. Just when the bodyguard was about to collide with Nank, Nank had retreated 2 steps. When the bodyguard had run past, she had returned to her original position. Her advance and retreat had been noiseless, like a phantom, as if she had not moved at all. Not even great General Jin Yulu, who had plowed the fields outside White Emperor City for many years, could achieve such a speed. Even with his vast knowledge, he knew that only one woman in the world could possess such speed, and it could not be her. Luobu calmly glanced at Nank, then turned to the bodyguard and asked, "What's the matter?" "Retreat, retreat, the demons have retreated!" The bodyguard gasped for breath, a very complex expression on his face. It was a mixture of joy and bewilderment. No matter how one looked at it, the retreat of the demons was a good thing. It should have been joyous, even joyous, but it had been too sudden. Just like this bodyguard, the vast majority of soldiers in Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, including the Mount Song Army Headquarters, the Black Mountain Army Headquarters, Blue Pass, Snowhold Pass, and even countless people in the distant capital were shocked and delighted by this abrupt news, and then they felt a few strange emotions. In the beginning of this war that had begun more than 2 years ago, the coup of the Mausoleum of Books and the storm that followed in the imperial court meant that the great Zhou dynasty had not made sufficient preparations, allowing the demon army to gain a slight advantage. However, afterwards, the two sides entered a long stalemate, with the humans even gaining a slight advantage. The demon army, including the wolf cavalry, had suffered grievous casualties on the snowy plains, and even now, they had not gained a single advantage. In these circumstances, why had the demons taken the initiative to retreat? Just what was the demon lord thinking? And what was that military advisor Black Robe, famed for his cunning and resourcefulness, thinking? Was this war that had lasted for 2 years just a ruckus, or was it just a show of strength to stabilize the new emperor's position in Xuelao City? Upon hearing this news, Luobu was also rather surprised. He had only just learned of the death of Divine General Ning Shiwei of the Mount Song Army Headquarters, so he did not know any more. Only Chen Chongsheng clearly knew why the demons had retreated. More than 2 years ago, the capital's mausoleum of the Mausoleum of Xuelao City had taken. The demon army had suddenly moved south not for the land and wealth of the human race, but to search for the demon lord's whereabouts, as well as to conceal Xuelao City's true intentions. To the new demon Black Robe and the demon commander, the demon commander, as if they could killed. But, to one to the death, 1-1. On that night, the demon lord finally died in that garden by the lake in Mount Han, so what reason did the demon army have to continue staying? Up until now, only an extremely small number of people in the world knew the truth behind the demon army's retreat. Many soldiers were somewhat at a loss, while fellows like Zhixiu and Guan Feibai felt extremely dissatisfied. But in the end, this was still something worth celebrating. Even the remote Sloping Cliff Horse Farm received a reward from the Mount Song Army Headquarters. Amidst this reward, which was far from being generous, the most welcomed by the soldiers were the 2 carts of wyvern meat. Wyverns were naturally not true dragons, but monsters of Mount Han. They were famed for their tender and delicious meat, and were regarded by all the gluttons of the world as a supreme accompaniment to wine. At night, tensome bonfires were lit in the mountains. The wyvern meat hanging from the roasting racks exuded a strange yet not cloying fragrance. The horses could be faintly heard in the distance. Perhaps the addition of frost grass at dusk had made these horses even more impulsive. Chen Chongsheng sat by one of the bonfires, a plate in his hands. On the plate were 2 pieces of freshly roasted wyvern meat. The meat had been personally roasted by Nang. The edges were somewhat charred, but they were still edible. He looked to his side and saw that Nang's small face was covered in oil, and she was happily chewing on the meat. He suddenly thought that if Gigi were here, she would definitely be very angry. But what about Yorong? And then he remembered that fellow called Qiushan Jun had the blood of a true dragon. For some reason, he was happy, and he felt that the meat on the plate was a little more fragrant. As the night deepened, the numerous stars fell over the mountains. The horses grew quiet, and the soldiers by the bonfires continued to eat and drink, laughing and chatting. Chen Chongqing noticed that he had not seen Luobu's figure today. He stood up, looked around, and then walked towards the mountain stream. This mountain stream, formed from the melted snow between the mountains, was extremely clear. It flowed towards the wastelands of the north, different from the vast majority of rivers on the continent that flowed west. The starlight shone on the mountain stream, forming a beautiful silver belt. The frost grass in the mountains was already covered in a thin layer of white wool, and now that it was dyed by the starlight, it seemed to transform into true frost. A figure stood under the starlight, somewhat lonely. Chen Chongqing walked over and sat down next to that figure. Perhaps it was because the starlight was too bright, but the weed-like beard could not completely conceal the true appearance of that face. Chen Chongqing once again confirmed that Luobu was very young, only a few years older than him. "What are you thinking about?" Luobu was not eating meat, only drinking wine. A very exquisite little wine pot was dangled by his 2 fingers, swaying in the night wind and starlight, appearing very elegant and at ease. Hearing Chen Chongqing's question, Luobu fell silent for a while, then said, "Thinking about the impermanence of heaven and earth." Anyone who answered such a simple question with such a sentence would make others feel a little uncomfortable. But coming from his mouth, there was no such feeling. It was as if he was a person who should naturally speak like this. Of course, if that friend of Chen Chongqing's was present, he might still hold his belly and laugh, then use harsh words to thoroughly humiliate Luobu. Chen Chongqing did not, because he came from Xining village, not Wenshui city. Moreover, he often thought about similar questions, though he very rarely spoke of them to others. When the ancients came, the tears of the vicissitudes of time flowed down, ultimately flowing west. He thought of that scroll of time, also known as the Canon of Flowing West, thought of the chains under New North Bridge, thought of the tomb beneath the Orthodox Academy that no one knew about, thought of all the things that had happened in the last 10 years, and gradually, he felt sorrowful. Gazing at the beautiful mountains and rivers under the starlight, he said, "Not giving up day and night. What are you thinking about?" "Thinking about the impermanence of heaven and earth. Not giving up day and night." There seemed to be no connection between this question and answer, stiff and incongruous, but carefully tasting it, there was a flavor to it. At this moment there should be wine here. Luobu glanced at Chen Chongqing and placed the small wine pot in his hand. Looking at the small wine pot in his hand, Chen Chongqing was somewhat hesitant. Luobu was somewhat surprised. "You don't drink?" Chen Chongqing replied, "My body has been poor since I was a child, so I pay more attention to this aspect." Luobu would never force someone to drink. Seeing him in a difficult position, Luobu smiled and stopped, preparing to take the wine pot. But Chen Chongqing raised the wine pot and took a sip. After returning to the Qin kingdom, the feeling of writing stories really has gotten much better. Chapter 797. A mouthful of wine entered his throat and was like a red-hot wire. Chen Chongqing almost choked and only managed to swallow with great difficulty, his face instantly turning red. He had not expected that a person like Luobu would drink such a spicy wine. Of course, the primary reason was that he rarely drank wine. After coming to the capital, he had only tasted wine for the first time. He had only drunk it with Su Yu Rong and Tang Tang on Fortune Peace Road. For someone who did not drink wine, the only reason they drank wine was who they drank with. He began to miss the beef ribs on Fortune Peace Road, the Plum Garden Inn, and the great banyan tree in the Orthodox Academy. That year, on the great banyan tree, he had a long conversation with Tang 36 in the twilight. He returned the wine pot to Luobu and said, "I have a friend who wants to do some things, but his family doesn't agree. They think he's making trouble, so he's under a lot of pressure." Luobu smiled. His eyes were like the stars in the night sky, bright to the extreme, their depths concealing boundless warmth, or perhaps passion. Chen Chongqing's eyes were also very bright, but this did not originate from the light in their depths, but from their cleanliness, as if they had been washed by water for many years. Luobu looked at him and said, "Has anyone ever said that your eyes are like mirrors?" Chen Chongqing did not understand what he meant and gave a puzzled grunt. A bright mirror can reflect a person, can reflect the slightest movement in the world, can easily discover many problems. Luobu used 2 fingers to lightly shake the wine pot. "Your guess is correct. My problem does not come from myself, nor does it come from the outside world, but from my family. To be more precise, it was my father who transferred me from the roaming cavalry and demoted me to Sloping Cliff Horse Farm." Chen Chongqing thought it over, then asked, "He wants you to be safer?" "No one knows what that father of mine is thinking. Many years ago, many people, including me, believed him to be a mediocre person, only thinking about the interests of the clan. But later events proved that only those who thought this way were truly mediocre." At this point, Luobu took a sip of wine, then continued, "From childhood to adulthood, my father treated me extremely well. I once doubted this kindness, but after that incident, I no longer doubted it. But this true kindness is now my true problem." He once more thought of the past. His father walked down the mountain along the mountain path, not even sparing a glance at his heavily injured self. Suddenly a startled bird flew out of the forest, followed by her father's joyful and gratified laughter. Chen Chongqing also remembered the past. He walked down from the mausoleum of books while his master walked up. They brushed shoulders on the divine path like strangers. "Actually, I envy the pressure that comes with this kind of care." After he said this, there was a moment of silence by the stream. They were all young people, but they each had their own heaviness. Suddenly, there was the sound of water. A silver-white fish leaped out of the water and followed the starlight along the mountain stream. The 2 of them shifted their gazes towards the wilderness at the end of the mountain stream. "If the injuries in your meridians are healed, if you look carefully, you might be able to see that they are slightly brighter." Luobu raised the wine pot in his hand and pointed it towards the distant north, as if he was showing respect and also as an offering. Chen Chongqing knew what he meant. When he had followed Su Li south from the snowy plains, on the first few nights, he would occasionally see that halo of light in the north. Moreover, Zhixiu, who rarely spoke, had mentioned it several times in the Orthodox Academy. In that night sky, besides the river of stars in the south, there was also a bright celestial body, the legendary moon of the demon race. Drinking wine was a leisurely affair, so drinking wine was naturally chatting. Starting from the moon of the demon race, they chatted about the strictness of Xuelao City, the terrifying abyss, the crazy and decadent tendencies of the demon nobles in art, the emeralds on the demon commander's armor, and then they chatted about the conservatism and dullness of the great western continent. The vast majority of the time, it was Luobu who spoke, with Chen Chongqing only occasionally saying a few words in response. As they chatted, Luobu revealed an unimaginable amount of knowledge, tens of thousands of li of rivers and mountains, tens of thousands of years of time. If Chen Chongqing had not been well versed in the Taoist canon since he was a child, and had also traveled tens of thousands of li, he would have had no idea how to respond. But it was precisely because he had been well versed in the Taoist canon since he was a child, and had also traveled tens of thousands of li, that even though he was not good with words, he could occasionally exchange a few words and argue with them. To geniuses, what they lacked the most was not friends, but someone who could understand what they were saying. Perhaps it was for this reason that this leisurely conversation over wine proceeded very happily. Both Luobu and Chen Chongqing were very happy. The longer they chatted, the broader and deeper the topics covered. The more Chen Chongqing listened, the more he admired Luobu. Luobu was like a clear pool of water. It didn't seem extraordinary, but it was impossible to tell how deep it was. Just what in the world did he not know? Just who was this bearded young officer? The more Chen Chongqing thought about it, the more he felt that this person was truly extraordinary. Whether it was his knowledge or his demeanor, they were all so admirable. When Luobu began to recount the 5 mistakes Emperor Taizong and Wang Jitze had made during the Great Zhou Cavalry's second northern expedition, he couldn't help but recall all the extraordinary people he had met in his life. He realized that Go Hanshi, Zhixiu, Tang Tang, and Su Moyu were all inferior to this person. He even felt that in some aspects, even Senior Su Li was not necessarily stronger than this person. For a person like Luobu, no matter how happy he was with his soldiers, in such a remote horse farm, how could he not feel depressed, perhaps lonely? If he didn't, why would he sit alone under the starlight, far away from the bonfire, and then talk for so long with Chen Chongqing? The more Chen Chongqing thought about it, the more he felt that Luobu could not continue to stay at Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. He should go to the Mount Song Army headquarters. Luobu saw that he wanted to say something but then hesitated, guessing at what he wanted to say. Smiling, he said, "The demons have already retreated, so what use is there in going to the Mount Song Army headquarters?" Chen Chongqing replied, "There will be a day when the demons will return." A hint of admiration appeared in Luobu's eyes. "There aren't many people as clear-headed as you in the last few years, but I still won't go to the Mount Song Army headquarters. In a few days, after I send you to the Mount Song Army headquarters, I will leave." Chen Chongqing asked in concern, "Where are you going?" Luobu replied, "To return to the mountain." Chen Chongqing wanted to invite him to leave the mountain. But he was beginning to miss that mountain. Of course, he had always been thinking about that girl on that other mountain. Just like Chen Chongqing had been for the last 2 years. The emotion of longing was truly contagious. There was no need for words, no need for glances. The stream bank fell silent once more. For a very long time the two did not speak. As they gazed at the faint remnants of the moon in the northern plains, they silently longed. After some time, Luobu turned his head and asked, "You also have a girl you like?" The official WeChat account has made a few minor adjustments. Friends are welcome to explore them. Of course, the column afterward of the night will still be maintained, so that everyone can look back on it and review it in the long years of waiting. In addition, after a year, the WeChat Q&A is about to return to Jianghu. Its primary purpose is to chat with everyone, just like these 2 stupid children by the stream. Everyone can send their expectations, doubts, or questions about their lives and work to the official account. In a few days I will reply to everyone. The official account number is Mauni1118. Chapter 798. Chen Chongqing nodded and said, "Yes, but we haven't seen each other for a long time." Luobu was very interested and asked, "Does she like you?" Chen Chongqing felt a little embarrassed and agreed. Luobu slightly raised his eyebrows, saying, "If you have a lover, why don't you meet?" Obviously, he didn't agree with Chen Chongqing's method. To him, the most difficult thing was to have a lover. Since he had feelings for her, he naturally wanted to stay with her forever and not be separated for even a moment. Chen Chongqing thought about it and said, "It's not convenient to meet her, and she has some important things to do." Luobu said nothing more. He raised the wine pot between his fingers and took a large gulp, muttering, "Liking each other, what kind of feeling is that?" Chen Chongqing didn't hear it clearly and asked, "What?" "It's nothing. Just drunk talk." Luobu gazed at the wilderness at the end of the mountain stream, as if he could see the mountain peak that was perpetually shrouded in clouds and mist. A faint trace of worry appeared on his face. From the first moment he woke up, the Luobu in Chen Chongqing's eyes was carefree yet indifferent, downtrodden yet unruly, but he had never seen him like this. That trace of sorrow was very faint, but the beard on his face could not hide it. Why were there so many vicissitudes between his young brows? He really wanted to know Rob's story and what he had been through. I am a person without a story. Luobu very quickly shook off that emotion and handed the wine pot over to Chen Chongqing, saying indifferently, because my life has been too smooth. Apart from the one time I encountered trouble when I was young, I've never had anything that I couldn't wish for. Chen Chongqing thought to himself, then why are you so worried? But there are many things in this world that have nothing to do with your own efforts, such as the matters between men and women, or the matters of life and death. No matter how hard you struggle and grow, you can't be sure that you can defeat the other, because these two relationships require a response. Luobu pointed to the sky full of stars and said, "You tell the starry sky that you don't want to return, but the starry sky doesn't respond to you. You will grow old and then die. You tell the girl that I like you, but even if you are the best, she just doesn't like you. What can you do then? The starry sky and the lady would only look at you quietly. They might pity you or sympathize with you, but when would they ever change their minds? A starry sky that could change its color, shape, and laws at will could only be an oil painting in Shuilao City. A girl who would fall in love with him because of begging or hard work might also be a good girl, but unfortunately she was not the girl he liked. What can you do?" A simple sentence, but it made Chen Chongqing feel very sad. Perhaps it was because he had prayed countless times to the starry sky for forgiveness. He clumsily patted Rob's shoulder, trying to comfort him, but he didn't know what to say. The sky was filled with stars. The girl is far to the south. Thank God he didn't say anything. Luobu was still in a good mood when he returned to his study. In the past few years, he had always played the role of a teacher in the sect, even in front of disciples of the same generation. Moreover, with his knowledge, there were not many people who could make him talk so freely, except for his second junior brother and junior sister. Originally, he was prepared to find out the identity of that fellow, but for the sake of this conversation, no matter which force he was from, he would let him be. What was slightly regretful was that this guy's alcohol tolerance was too terrible, far inferior to his junior sister. Yes, who could compare to his junior sister? He stared at the now empty bookshelf in a daze for a very long time, a bitter smile appearing on his face. He shook his head, dispelling these thoughts, and began to tidy up his study in preparation for his departure. He had not deceived that fellow. He really was preparing to leave and return to the mountain. At this moment, he noticed that the secret mark on his desk had changed from when he had left, and knew that someone had been here. He took a letter from a hidden box on his desk. This was a letter sent from home. The letter described a few major events that had recently occurred. It was extremely detailed, even more complete than the highest level of military document. His gaze slowly moved over the letter, his sword-like brows gradually rising as if he wanted to chop off the beard on his face. His gaze also grew colder and colder. It turned out that on that night, besides Ning Shiwei, Zhu Yi, and Tianhai Zhani, there had also been people from the Tang clan. These people had all died because they had gone to steal those mysterious cinnabar pills. He had long since grown accustomed to the conduct of the important figures of the great Zhou imperial court, but he still felt that this method was very shameless, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. What crime was there in seeking one's own death? He continued to read the letter. And then, he saw the demon lord's name. His expression turned rather solemn. Finally, he saw Chen Chongqing's name. His expression became abnormally solemn, and the hand holding the letter went stiff. He raised his head to look out the window. He didn't know if it was the stream or that small house that was forever stewing meat. He thought of the marks on that cliff, of that unconscious fellow, of that conversation by the stream, and of the details of that conversation. His expression changed several times. At the start it was a little red, but it did not seem like anger. Soon after, it became a little white, but it did not seem like shock. It was like a drunkard who had drunk too much wine. In the end, all his emotions were replaced by a bitter and bitter smile, brimming with self-deprecation. Drinking wine under the starry sky and talking about girls while drinking had always been something that young men loved to do the most. Back in the Orthodox Academy, when Tang 36 did these things, Chen Chongqing had not been willing to accompany him. After tonight, however, he realized that it truly was very enjoyable. He thought, in a few days, when I go to Wenshui to see Tang 36, should I bring a few bottles of good wine as repayment for the Tang old master's kindness in giving me the umbrella? Of course, the conversation over wine was the same as the drinking itself. It mainly depended on who the person was talking to. Chen Chongqing felt that tonight's conversation was very pleasant, even somewhat delightful, because the person he was talking to was Luobu. This made him think of the candlelight conversation he had with Go Hanshi, Guan Feibai, and the others in the grass hut in the Mausoleum of Books. Of course, tonight's conversation was most similar to his conversation with Su Yorong in that snowy temple. That snowy temple was by the white grass path. The white grass path was in the plains of the unsetting sun. The plains of the unsetting sun was a part of the garden of Zhou. Suddenly, Chen Chongqing woke up with a start, no longer feeling drunk. A few days ago, when he had just woken up from his coma, he felt like he had forgotten something. Now, he finally remembered. There were still people in the garden of Zhou. He took a sip of the strong tea that Nank had brought over and asked her to keep an eye on the door. Then he took off the string of stone pearls from his wrist. Among the 5 stone pearls, one was black in color. His spiritual sense rested on the black stone pearl. In the next moment, he felt a chilly wind blow against his face, and it was at the highest point of the Mausoleum of Zhou. As far as the eye could see, the grassland had long since recovered to its original state, a field of green that was very pleasing to the eye. Suddenly, a thunderous roar rose up from all around the Mausoleum of Zhou, and a tide of monsters surged over. That year, he and that girl also saw the same scene. Only the starry sky and the girl, the food and wine, the novels and the movies, the scenery, the universe, the truth, and oneself cannot disappoint. Chapter 799. Chen Chongqing looked around the Mausoleum of Zhou and quickly discovered the people he was searching for. At the very end of the stone path of the mausoleum, the figures of Anhua and the Deputy General were extremely clear. In the past, he would have been able to easily use a movement technique to reach that place, but now, he could only slowly crawl down. Anhua and the Deputy General noticed his figure and incessantly waved their hands, simultaneously shouting something, most likely warning him to be careful. They were rather far away, so Chen Chongqing simply could not hear what they were saying. Moreover, the roars of the monsters around the Mausoleum of Zhou were truly too loud. After some time, he finally reached the end of the stone path. "Your Holiness!" Anhua prostrated on the ground in pleasant surprise, and the Deputy General also got down on one knee. Chen Chongqing indicated for them to stand up and said, "My apologies, I've made you wait here for so long." On that night in the garden in the mountains, Demon General Haidi had first attacked, and then the Demon Lord had appeared with Nank. At the most dangerous moment, he had sent Anhua and the Deputy General into the Garden of Zhou, and then he had fallen unconscious from his heavy injuries. When he woke up, he did not remember anything. Carefully calculating, Anhua and the Deputy General had already remained in the Garden of Zhou for quite a few days, and he had no idea how they had managed to persist. On that night in the mountains, just as they were about to die in the thick demon qi, Anhua and the Deputy General suddenly realized that they had arrived in a completely unfamiliar world. They had appeared in an extremely grand and lofty mausoleum, surrounded by a boundless grassland and countless strange beasts that were almost extinct on the continent. If they had been able to walk around this world, they might have realized that this was the legendary Garden of Zhou. However, when the monsters discovered their existence, they surrounded the mausoleum of Zhou, making it impossible for them to leave. Fortunately, Anhua had brought some rations with her, and as a member of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, she was skilled in the Sacred Light technique. As a result, the injuries of the Deputy General did not worsen, and instead gradually improved. However, one could easily imagine the psychological pressure they had to endure from being surrounded by such a vicious and terrifying monster tide. Today they finally saw Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing said, "I'll take you away now." For some reason, these monsters have never entered the mausoleum, but they also won't let us leave. Anhua looked at the dense monster tide outside the mausoleum of Zhou and said with lingering fear. In her view, no matter how amazing the Pope was, he was still a single person, and a very young one at that. No matter what, he would not be able to deal with so many terrifying monsters. Chen Chongqing walked to the front of the stone path and looked at the seemingly endless horde of monsters on the plains. After several years, the Garden of Zhou had already finished repairing itself. The seal of the plains of the unsetting sun no longer existed, and the number of monsters gradually increased, even surpassing the original number. Chen Chongqing waved his hand. Countless roars, whether clear or violent, came from the mouths of countless demon beasts, as if countless thunder had exploded at the same time. The Deputy General became abnormally nervous, while Anhua's face also paled. Just what does the Pope want to do? What happened next was completely beyond their imagination. Countless demonic beasts knelt down at the same time, and like a tide, they spread out in all directions of the grassland, appearing extremely docile. Thousands of gray vultures flew in the air in front of the stone platform, and then flew into the distance. The beast tide gradually dispersed and disappeared into the grassland. In the end, only 2 mountainous monsters were left. If one looked carefully, they would probably be able to see a small black dot in front of them. Is that the legendary monster bull? The Deputy General looked at the largest black monster in front of the mausoleum and thought of the description he had read in a book. He had already recognized the other great monster as the mountain-toppling fiend, also a terrifying existence on the ranking of 100 beasts. Although it was very rare, on the battlefield with the demons, one would occasionally see this kind of monster in the distance. As for the monster bull, it had truly been many years since it had appeared on the continent. Chen Chongqing led them out of the mausoleum of Zhou. As she thought of the previous scene, Anhua gazed at his back, her elegant face filled with admiration and reverence. The Pope had only waved his hand and the monster tide had dispersed. Could this be the Pope's miniature world, just like the green leaf world in the Li Palace? They walked down the mausoleum, passed through those stone monoliths that only had their seats remaining, and arrived at the white grass path. The weather was very clear, allowing them to see very far into the distance, but they could not see the temple. Perhaps it was because the monster bull's figure was too massive, blocking their line of sight. Chen Chongqing gazed at the single eye of the monster bull and nodded his head. He then greeted the mountain-toppling fiend, and then looked in front of them. Only now did Anhua clearly see that the small black dot she had seen on the mausoleum was actually an earthen yellow monster. This monster was very thin and small. Its fur was tattered and its limbs were incomplete. It looked very pitiful, but for some reason, its eyes always gave people a very cold and frightening feeling. Even though it had already thrown itself in front of Chen Chongqing and was hugging his calf and constantly chirping something, it seemed to be especially flattering, just like a dog. The Deputy General suddenly thought of a possibility, and his expression instantly became extremely uneasy. With a trembling voice, he asked, "This is an earth monkey?" Anhua had originally been considering whether or not she should treat the monster's wounds, but upon hearing this name, her face instantly paled. Back when the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets was ranking the ranking of 100 beasts, there had always been a great debate over whether or not the Earth Monkey should be placed on the ranking, and where it should be placed. This was because this kind of monster that was skilled in concealment did not have particularly strong individual battle prowess. It was far inferior to the innate divine strength of the mountain-toppling fiend, and even less so than the monster bull, which could fight against an army of 1,000. However, all the cultivators would rather face the mountain-toppling fiend and the monster bull than face the earth monkey alone. This was because this kind of monster was far too intelligent, or perhaps it could be said that it was far too treacherous and cunning, and it was also incomparably cold-blooded and cruel. And Hua and the Deputy General were truly unable to connect the infamous Earth Monkey with the dog hugging Chen Chongqing's calf. Chen Chongqing rubbed the Earth Monkey's head to express his affection. Through its strange chattering, he learned of the recent situation in the Garden of Zhou, but he still did not agree to its request to leave the Garden of Zhou and take a look. He had thought many times about how to deal with the monsters in the grassland, and he had even discussed with Su Yorong whether or not he should place them in the grassland he had gifted her. After the seal over the plains of the unsetting sun was broken, not only had the monsters recovered their numbers, their strength had also increased, so they should be able to live in safety. However, the monster bull, mountain-toppling fiend, and the other monsters had long since grown accustomed to life in the Garden of Zhou. They knew that the outside world was incomparably dangerous, so they had no intention of leaving. Although the Earth Monkey's body was damaged and its strength was far inferior to before, it still wanted to go out and take a look. To it, the word dangerous was like the most delicious honey. Yet Chen Chongqing could not let it leave the Garden of Zhou. One reason was for its safety, and the other was because he was worried about the safety of the outside world. The Earth Monkey, somewhat aggrieved, rubbed against his calf, but it did not continue to pester him. It did not dare to show any resentment in its eyes, not even daring to be disappointed. Using its 2 forelimbs to support its damaged body, it climbed back into the coiled horn on the mountain-toppling fiend's head and obediently waved its hand at him. Chapter 800. As they watched the monster bull and the mountain-toppling fiend slowly advance into the depths of the grassland, Hua and the Deputy General were speechless for a very long time. After coming to this world, all the scenes they saw were so shocking. Lao General recalled that a certain fellow had once said that the demon marshal liked to sit in the coiled horns of a mountain-toppling fiend. And in the Pope's world, even a crippled Earth Monkey could sit in the same position. "General, may I know your name?" A voice broke his shocked association. He turned around and saw Chen Chongqing looking at him. He hurriedly replied, "This general is Chen Chou." Chen Chongqing asked, "General Chen, I've always been curious about something. When you decided to go to Gaoyang village, weren't you worried that your superiors would say you left your post without permission?" Chen Chou bitterly smiled. "I was a criminal general demoted from 7 Li Shi to the Mount Song Army headquarters, so I had nothing to do. At the time, I thought it would be good to save someone, but I didn't expect to encounter so many things." Chen Chongqing felt that the name 7 Mile Shi was very familiar, but he didn't think too much about it. He greatly admired this general called Chen Chou, whether it was the risk he had taken to send an array master to Gaoyang village to seek medical advice, or the courage and resolve he had displayed when facing those experts. He asked, "And now? Do you still want to return to the Mount Song Army headquarters to work?" Somewhat confused, Chen Chou asked, "My lady's meaning is?" Chen Chongqing replied, "If you go to the Mount Song Army headquarters and become a divine general, presumably no one will be able to keep you idle." Chen Chou froze. Only after Hua's soft reminder did he come to his senses. With a face filled with confusion, he pointed at himself and asked, "I'm going back to the Mount Song Army headquarters to be a divine general?" Chen Chongqing said, "Correct." Chen Chou felt this to be utterly absurd. He couldn't help but bitterly smile and shake his head. "If this was before I was demoted, I would already be the commanding general of roaming cavalry. If I worked hard on the front lines for another 10 years, accumulating military merit and increasing my strength, I might really have been able to fight for a position in the Mount Song Army headquarters, but now, right now, he was only a deputy general, the lowest-ranking general. He was 6 levels away from the position of a mortal general. What else could he say? In the end, he could only sigh. He had always felt that his father had given him a bad name. As the saying goes, it's hard to reward a person with merit, so it can only be left in the file to slowly age. Otherwise, why would that fellow have been demoted to Sloping Cliff, and why would he be in his current situation? Chen Chongqing suddenly realized that he didn't know what to say next. If his friend were not in Wenshui City but here, perhaps everything would be much simpler. That friend would assuredly pat Chen Chou on the shoulder and heroically say, "Who is Chen Chongqing? If he says you can do it even if you can't." This was the reason, but Chen Chongqing himself couldn't say such a thing. Fortunately, there was someone beside him, and Hua walked up to Chen Chou and whispered a few words to him. Only then did Chen Chou realize that the one who wanted him to become a divine general was not some swindling priest from some minor Taoist church, nor was it some insatiably greedy clerk from the ministry of the army, but the Pope. His eyes brightened, then quickly turned blank. His emotions were very complicated, and Hua knew that this was a reaction from receiving a massive mental blow. Smiling and shaking her head, she ignored him and walked back to Chen Chongqing. The Li Palace had never interfered in the affairs of the imperial court, and in the last few years, it had kept an extremely low profile. Logically speaking, even if Chen Chongqing was the Pope, he still could not casually arrange for someone to become a divine general of the Mount Song Army headquarters. And just as Chen Chou had said, in both seniority and background, he was clearly not a suitable candidate. But to Hua, this was not a problem that needed to be considered. From the snowy mountains to this place, from knowing the origins of the cinnabar pill to dispersing the monster tide with a wave of his sleeve, Chen Chongqing's image in her heart had become incomparably sacred and lofty. She was now Chen Chongqing's most loyal believer and follower. To put it another way, if Chen Chongqing were to tell her that tomorrow morning the sun would rise in the west, she would assuredly wait the entire night just to glance at the horizon. If she discovered that the sun was still rising in the east, she would wonder if she had misheard or if she had gotten the wrong direction. "You and Chen Chou will go together to the Mount Song Army headquarters," Chen Chongqing said to her. "I will write a letter for you to carry on your person. In addition, there are some other matters that I must trouble you with." And Hua felt overwhelmed by the Pope's orders, but she also felt an enormous pressure, like she was standing before an abyss. Her voice trembled as she replied, "Yes, Your Holiness." Chen Chongqing looked at her face and found it rather familiar. His mind stirred as he asked, "How are you related to Archbishop Enlin?" And Hua's expression became even more modest as she softly replied, "Archbishop Enlin is my aunt." Chen Chongqing did not continue to ask. Whether it was the orthodoxy or the imperial court, they were all matters between people, so there was no need to say anything more. His gaze followed the white grass path, but he still did not see that temple. He thought to himself, could it have been destroyed by the shards of the sky that year? If he had the time, he should go and investigate. Then, he confirmed that the things he had left here were still intact. Without further delay, he brought Hua and Chen Chou away. The wind blowing through the mountains was a little colder. The stars in the night sky quietly watched the three people by the stream. And Hua and Chen Chou had no experience with spatial shifts, so they couldn't help but be dazed for a moment. It took some time for them to calm down. "Your Holiness, where are we?" And Hua asked. Chen Chongqing replied, "Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. That road leads to the Mount Song Army headquarters. There's a horse station 24 li away. I'll have to trouble you a little." Hearing the words Sloping Cliff Horse Farm, Chen Chao's expression changed. He turned to the barracks behind him that occasionally had lights, thinking, could that fellow really be here? At this moment, Anhua finally could not help but ask, Your Holiness, the world to which Your Holiness rescued us, where is it? Chen Chou also could not help but look at him. He wanted to know the answer, but he was also rather nervous. Chen Chongqing thought it over, then said, Your guess is correct. That place is the Garden of Zhou, and that mausoleum is the Mausoleum of Zhou. Having obtained the answer they most wanted to know and confirmed that they had stayed in that legendary place for a few days, Anhua and Chen Chou felt their minds ripple, and they felt very satisfied. There was no more reason to stay, so they had to part ways. Your Holiness, please take care of your body for the sake of all the believers in the world. As he watched those two figures vanish into the darkness, Chen Chongqing fell silent for a very long time. In the few years after leaving the capital, he had done many things, but it was only tonight, when he asked Anhua and Chen Chou to do those two things, that was the true beginning. In the last few years, he had followed his martial uncle the Pope's arrangements and followed the agreement he had reached in the Orthodox Academy on that snowy night. He had always concealed his identity and walked the world, silently improving himself. But it seemed that his master and many other people did not believe in his silence. Silence, silence. No matter how silent he was still the Pope. He already possessed the unconditional trust and loyalty of countless believers in the world, just like Anhua. Then he should unconditionally assume the responsibility he should assume. In the name of His Holiness the Pope. Chapter 801. Taoism was the state religion of the Zhou dynasty, but it was not only the state religion of the Zhou dynasty. Long before the Zhou dynasty was founded, Taoism was the state religion of many dynasties. The Pope was the wielder of divine authority in the orthodoxy, the ruler of all believers in the world. From a certain perspective, he possessed a status even higher than a sovereign. How did one become a good pope? Chen Chongqing was well versed in the Taoist canon and had seen the deeds of countless previous popes, but this sort of thing was impossible to learn. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that his martial uncle the Pope had never taught him how to act, only attempting to influence him through his words and actions. For example, prioritizing the world, hiding one's strength and biding one's time, being prudent and prudent, not caring about temporary gains and losses, not caring about the reputation of the world, and only caring about the people. After leaving the capital, he headed directly to the north like many other young cultivators. He wanted to exert himself on the battlefield. However, the facts proved that this was of no use at all. On the contrary, it was easy for the front lines to fall into chaos and the morale of the army to waver. He then began to use his medical skills to save people and refine the cinnabar pill. He had indeed saved many people, but it was still not enough. Wang Jitsa had mentioned in his notebook that positions were relative. In different positions, one would naturally have to choose different ways of doing things. He was currently the Pope. If he wanted to contribute to the world, he could not act like a swordsman or a doctor. He had to use different methods. Su Li felt it beneath him to associate with this dark and decaying world, to look at it with disdain. If the mortal dust stained his body, he would slash it with his sword. The Tianhai Divine Empress, on the other hand, used even darker and crueler methods to suppress it, attempting to completely disperse that stale air. His martial uncle the Pope's methods were even gentler and more conservative. From Chen Chongqing's point of view, these methods were all wrong. It was impossible for him to be like his martial uncle, constantly conceding for the sake of the greater good, willing to sacrifice himself. He was also not like Senior Su Li, who was so alienated from the world. Although this world did not treat him kindly, he still liked this world and the people that lived in it. Of course, it was even more impossible for him to do what the Tianhai Divine Empress had done. Back when he had read Wang Jitsa's notebook in the Lingyan Pavilion, he had already given up on any hope of having the world dance to his tune. His method or what he wanted to do was actually very simple. Since he didn't want to hand over the world to those rotten and boring people, he should stand up. Just like the spring breeze had turned the Jiangnan shore green, just like wildflowers had bloomed all over the hillside. Just like that, it was open and aboveboard, it was announced to the world. If he was alone, it would be very difficult. Fortunately, he had many people of the same age. It would be great if that guy was willing to join them. Unfortunately, why wasn't he willing to come out of seclusion? Chen Changxing looked at the distant room that was still brightly lit. He didn't know what Luobu was thinking at this moment. The demons truly had retreated, without any traps or holding anything back. From the northern reaches of Tianliang County to the western foothills of Mount Han in a radius of around 2,000 li, not a single demon could be seen. Only 2 groups of wolf cavalry remained on the banks of the Lahu River, most likely used to monitor the movements of the human army. Many people were still rather confused as to why the demons had retreated, but no matter how one looked at it, this was a victory for the human race. The Tensum Army headquarters and even more strongholds in the snowy plains of the north began to celebrate, their faces brimming with relaxed smiles as if they were celebrating a festival. The mood in the Mount Song Army headquarters was different from other places. It was tense and oppressive, the 2 sides of the main street packed with people. Whether it was soldiers, merchants, or the few ordinary people, all of them had worry and unease written all over their faces. They were not gathered here to celebrate the retreat of the demon army, but to wait for the results of an interrogation. In the past few days, many carriages had entered the Mount Song Army headquarters. Some of these carriages came from Blue Pass and Snowhold Pass, some came from Hanzhou City, and some even came from the distant capital. Each carriage represented a truly important figure, because Ning Shiwei was dead. On a certain night, he had brought his bodyguards and left his camp, vanishing without a trace. Later on, his corpse was found to be badly mutilated. Crucially, he had not died on the battlefield of the snowy plains, but in an extremely remote mountain range. A divine general had mysteriously died, so it was naturally necessary to investigate the truth. The soldiers, merchants, and people on the street also wanted to know what had happened. They had no idea that many other people had died on that night. The newly appointed clan master of the Zhu clan, Zhu Yi, the second-generation descendant that the Tianhai clan had focused on nurturing, Tianhai Zhani, and the Tang clan's 17th master had all died on that frigid night, just like Ning Shiwei. With so many important figures dead, there was naturally a need for even more important figures to investigate. 2 divine generals had come from Snowhold Pass and Blue Pass. A truly important figure had come from the Tianhai clan, Clan Master Tianhai Chenwu's younger brother, Tianhai Chenwen. However, he was not the person with the highest status in the Mount Song Army headquarters, as the Prince of Zhongshan had come from the capital as an imperial envoy from the imperial court. Only the Zhu clan of Tianliang County, because 2 generations of clan masters had passed away, did not have any other powerful figures. Its power had sharply declined, so it had only sent a random person. Presumably, this person would only be able to sit in on the investigation. When these important figures came to the Mount Song Army headquarters, their first priority was naturally to investigate the deaths of Ning Shiwei and the others, but it was obvious that the most important thing was that position. The position of the Divine General of the Mount Song Army headquarters. When the Divine Empress was still in power, the war against the demons had not proceeded smoothly, but the army was still no weaker than it had been at its peak. It had 38 divine generals. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Xue Xingchuan, Tian Chui, and other famous divine generals had died one after the other. Afterwards, the struggle in the imperial court had been equally fierce, a storm raging. Now, only 23 remained. The capital and Luoyang needed divine generals to stand guard, and even fewer divine generals could be left in the north. On the snowy plains, besides Snowhold Pass and Blue Pass, which had special statuses, The other armies only had one divine general. With Ning Shiwei's death, the position of divine general in the Mount Song Army headquarters became vacant, and it was impossible to transfer divine generals from other armies. This meant that the imperial court needed a new divine general. To the great Zhou army and the imperial court, the divine general was the most crucial position. This was because divine generals had military authority. At crucial moments, they could even mobilize soldiers without orders. Regardless of why Ning Shiwei had died, now that a position had become vacant, a new divine general could be promoted. Whether it was the Prince of Xiang's faction, the Tianhai clan, or any other faction in the court, none of them would miss this chance. In the depths of winter, snow did not fall on the Mount Song Army headquarters, but the stronghold built on the mountain was densely covered in dark clouds, and the light of the day was very cold. It was just like the expressions on the faces of these important figures seated in the main hall of the army headquarters. The Prince of Zhongshan sat in the center. Just as the rumors said, his face exuded a ruthless aura. Tianhai Qinwen and Divine General Jian, she from Snowhold Pass, sat to the right. The high official from the Grand Court of Revision, who had come with the Prince of Zhongshan and Divine General Cheng Tao from Blue Pass, sat to the left. Their camps were extremely clear, as were their standpoints. Otherwise, the mood in the main hall would not have been so oppressive, even somewhat gloomy. Divine General Cheng Tao looked at the commander of Gaoyang village, his complexion extremely unsightly. He yelled, "The commanding general has come to your camp, and you actually don't know anything?" Chapter 802. The commander of Gaoyang village knelt on the ground and kowtowed repeatedly. He didn't know what to say at all, because he really didn't know anything. An impatient expression appeared on the Prince of Zhongshan's face as he waved his hand to drive out the commander of Gaoyang village. The hall fell into silence again, and no one spoke for a long time. The palace had never given a clear decree, which meant that the venerable Taoist Shang Xingzhou had no bias in choosing the divine general of the Mount Song army, leaving it up to the various factions of the court to fight over it. The princes naturally wanted this position. It was said that even the Prince of Xiang, who had been in seclusion for more than a year in order to break into the divine domain, had made an exception and spoken. The Tianhai family was currently in a rather awkward situation. Although they had tried very hard to stabilize their position through their relationship with His Majesty, they could not go too far in order to avoid incurring the displeasure of the venerable Lord Taixin. Seeing that they were gradually being oppressed in the court, they could not let go of this opportunity. Everyone wanted to fight for this position, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. Moreover, what made them feel somewhat uneasy was that the Tang's 17th master had clearly died in the snowy mountains, so why had no one from the Tang clan come this time? If the Tang clan wanted to use this matter to cause trouble for the position of commander of the Mount Song army headquarters, given the relationship between the Tang clan and the palace, none of the people present had the confidence to contend against them. There are some things that everyone is well aware of, but we still have to go through the necessary procedures. The imperial court still needs to maintain its image. The impatience on Zhong Wangshan's face grew stronger and stronger. Ignoring the crowd, he signaled for the deputy of the Supreme Court to continue the trial. The deputy of the Supreme Court glanced at the dossier and was suddenly surprised. There were still people alive that night? Everyone in the hall was rather surprised at these words. Didn't the demon lord kill everyone? The Prince of Zhongshan was also interested, asking, why was it never mentioned before? The deputy of the Supreme Court read the file again and confirmed that he didn't read it wrong. He explained in a low voice, according to those two, they were affected by the battle and fainted. They only woke up a few days ago and crossed the mountains to return, so no one knows that they are still alive. The Prince of Zhongshan arched his brows and said, interesting, bring him in for questioning. A moment later, a woman wearing the ceremonial robes of the 13 divisions of radiant green and a middle-aged man wearing a military uniform arrived. They were in Hua and Chen Chou, who had returned to the Mount Song Army headquarters from Sloping Cliff Horse Farm. "State your identity." The teacher of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, Anhua. Deputy General Chun Cho of the Mount Song Army headquarters. Hearing these 2 sentences, it was obvious that the atmosphere in the main hall became more relaxed. To these powerful figures, a minor deputy general was truly not worth mentioning. Perhaps because of her relationship with the Li Palace, dealing with Anhua might be somewhat more troublesome, but it was not a major issue. In short, it was fine as long as it was not someone they could not control that they did not want to see. "Tell me what you saw that night. Tell me honestly and honestly. Don't lie." The Prince of Zhongshan impassively said to them, "In the records, the 2 of you should have been dead, but now you've returned alive. If there is a problem with the fact that the 2 of you survived, then this prince does not mind having the 2 of you die again." Seeing the cold gazes of these important figures, Chun Cho felt like he had returned to that cold night when he was surrounded by the demon wolf cavalry. He knew very well that what he was about to say would offend these important figures. It could even be said that he would offend the entire imperial court. But since he had promised the other party, he had to do it, because he was a soldier of the great Zhou dynasty. He took a deep breath and was about to step forward to reply. However, someone was faster than him, and Hua stood in front of him. Looking at the Prince of Zhongshan, Tianhai Chenwen, and the other important figures, she said, "In the autumn of the 3rd year of the new empire, General Chun Cho and I took a young array master on the verge of death to Gaoyang village. We received a message saying that the master of the cinnabar pill might be there." Her voice was very calm, very clear, and very unhurried. She spoke from Songyang to the lake garden being surrounded. The events of that night had only just begun, but a conclusion could already be drawn. Zhu Yi, Ning Shiwei, and Tianhai Zhani died because they wanted to plot against the master of the cinnabar pill and seize the cinnabar pill, but to their surprise, the demon lord did not die. In order to heal his injuries, he also came to the snowy mountains to search for the master of the cinnabar pill. The 2 sides met, so they all died. The important figures present all knew that Zhu Yi and the others truly had died to the demon lord's hands. This information came from the investigation of the scene, and most importantly from Bi Yanghong's judgment, but it could not be said to be accurate, because everyone was dead. Some of the important figures had guessed at why Zhu Yi and the others had gone to the snowy mountains, but this was the first time they had heard someone who had personally experienced it prove this point. It really was for the cinnabar pill. The Prince of Zhongshan glanced at Divine General Qing Tao. Divine General Qing Tao imperceptibly gave a slight nod. The Prince of Zhongshan's expression chilled as he confirmed that this was the matter the 2 sides had discussed in their letters last time. All the important figures of the capital knew of the cinnabar pill and had all tried to take this mystical pill for themselves. Putting aside whether what you say is true or not, even if this is the case, you cannot throw dirty water on the dead. What is murder? What is a futile attempt to seize it? A low voice rang out. The one who spoke was Tianhai Chenwen. Tianhai Zhani was his son, so he naturally could not allow his son to bear this sort of stain after his death. If they wanted to obtain the position of Divine General of the Mount Song Army, they could not leave behind anything that could easily be criticized. The important figures quickly reacted. Whether it was Tianhai Zhani, Zhu Yi, or Ning Shiwei, they could heroically die in battle, they could fall to their deaths from the mountain path, but they could not die like this. Divine General Jian, she expressionlessly replied, "Correct, Divine General Ning Shiwei was carrying out an order. He cannot be criticized." Impatience once more appeared on the Prince of Zhongshan's face. With a wave of his hand, he asked, "Get to the point. Did you personally witness them being killed by the demon lord?" And Hua shook her head. "We were in the garden by the lake at the time and did not see it with our own eyes, but we heard the demon lord personally admit to it. Even though the legendary demon lord was confirmed to be dead, none of the important figures present had the courage to accuse him of lying. The Prince of Zhongshan continued, "Based on what you say, the master of the cinnabar pill was also present?" Anhua calmly replied, "Yes." The Prince of Zhongshan stared into her eyes and asked, "Then how did he die?" Upon hearing this question, a few people slightly leaned forward, paying particular attention. In their view, since the demon lord had appeared, that person was assuredly dead. What they wanted to know was where the recipe for the cinnabar pill was. Anhua replied, "He did not die." The Prince of Zhongshan arched his brows. "What did you say?" Anhua calmly met his gaze and replied, "He did not die." The Prince of Zhongshan harshly yelled, "Everyone is dead, but you are still alive, that person is still alive. Do you think this prince is an idiot?"